We got a good teacher.
We're ready.
Fairbanks, Alaska. Perfect.
At this time, I will call the meeting of the Marshall City Council to order with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome everyone here this evening. We do have an agenda before us. Are there any changes to that agenda? If not, we'll operate under that agenda. The first item of action then would be to consider the minutes of the work session as well as a regular meeting that were both held on January 23rd, 2019. So the council does have the minutes of both of those meetings. Are there any corrections to note at this time?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Russ to approve the minutes of both of those meetings. We will move to a vote on that motion. Voting's closed. And that motion does pass. Move then to agenda item number 3. We have a series of public hearings this evening. 3 through 7 are all public hearings. So I'll talk a little bit about the public hearing procedure. At the public hearings, we'll have a member of the staff that will open the public hearing. We'll make a brief presentation on the topic of the public hearing. Then we'll open it up for public comment, both from the council as well as any member of the audience. The members of the audience, if you do wish to speak, you're welcome to do that. We do ask that you come and use the microphone at this time because this meeting is being carried over cable access television. So if you don't use the microphone, you're not heard over the broadcast. So when you come and use the microphone and then identify yourself and your address, and then that's how we'll have the public comment. And when every public comment is heard, then we'll close the public hearing and then we'll move on to the next item, which may be action on the item that was the topic of the public hearing. So the first public hearing is agenda item number 3. This is the public hearing on the ordinance amendment to Section 62-2, this deals with ice and snow. So I will call on Ilya Gutman, who will introduce this item as part of this public hearing. So welcome, Ilya.
Thank you, Mayor Council. The city ordinance regulates removal of the ice and snow from public sidewalks. And it requires the owners of adjacent properties to clean it, and if it's not done within a certain period of time, the city comes and does it. However, the ordinance does not regulate the removal of the snow and ice from private street, even though we had some concerns and complaints about that. So we reviewed the state statutes and figured out that the statutes do allow the city to regulate removal of the snow and ice from the private streets. And that's what this ordinance is about. It's an amendment to allow to regulate the removal of the snow and ice, require that owners remove it, and if the owners do not, the city will come and do that. Last time there was a question about what private street is, and we found a definition of the private street in the city ordinance. It's not in the chapter 62, it's in chapter 66, and it's in the memo. It says the private street is one that has not been dedicated but rather reserved as public access to property. So that's the existing definition in the ordinance, and to tie it up, we just added a reference to the new ordinance, so 62 chapter, just as defined in chapter 66. So it's tied together and it's clear what it means. So the recommendation is to approve it and allow the city to remove ice and snow if the owner doesn't remove it from the private street.
Okay, thank you, Ilya. Does council have any questions for Ilya before we open it up for public comment? Glenn, you have a...
Yes, we did have a question concerning if driveways would be considered as private streets, and the answer to that is no.
We do require it on the sidewalk that goes through the driveway if there is one, but not on the driveway itself. That's privately owned, but not considered a private street.
Thank you, Ilya. I'll open up now for public comment, either from the council or for members of the audience.
My name is Misty Butler. I live in Marshall at 127 E Street. I have photos to go with what I want to say. Is that okay?
Pass those out, yes.
Okay. I'm here concerning Broadmoor Valley, which would be considered private streets within that area. The Broadmoor Valley Mobile Home Park is located within city limits and is privately owned as an LLC. That designation does not make it an island unto itself. It's still a part of the city of Marshall. Homeowners pay city taxes. When the park owner neglects basic maintenance, be it snow removal, fixing potholes, no repair of rental units, that endangers families. It's imperative that the city of Marshall acknowledge the hardship of all its citizens and insist on at least basic protections. The snow removal ordinance is just one place to start. We appreciate having this hearing and hoping that the city will assist in the Broadmoor Valley Mobile Home Park, making it safer. So I just wanted to, I have a couple items I wanted to point out on these photos. The first photo was taken in March of 2018. At that time, the plow wasn't working out at Broadmoor Valley. So one of the residents had to hire someone to come and plow them out so they could get to work, otherwise they would lose their job, or their daughter would lose their job. When she complained and she was told by management, this is why you have four-wheel drives in Minnesota. No plan to fix anything. If you keep going, probably so there's 3 pictures about that time. On New Year's Eve, around that time, the same plow was still broken at the park and the park didn't get plowed out until concerns were raised with the city and emergency services and pressure was applied to the owner. Garbage service was refused until it was plowed out. If you go back a little bit further, in 2018, we have some pictures a resident took of one lane being plowed. And that's currently how when they do plow, it is one lane. And so cars can't get past each other. If you move on, there's a bus stop picture kind of showing where the bus stop is. Because the buses aren't allowed in the park, they have to be on the busy highway of Saratoga, very busy there during that time. And they have, if it's not cleared, if the sidewalks aren't cleared, they have to stand in the street. And then they get yelled at by the bus drivers, according to some residents, because it's not safe for them to stand in the streets, but there's nowhere else they can't stand on the sidewalks because there's no sidewalks cleared. I know this is about streets, but just that's part of the situation there. To get out of the second entrance, residents have to take a run at that to make it out because it's so icy and compacted that they can't get out of the park. And then finally, at the end there is, I don't know if there's any plans to address private sidewalks, but in common areas such as a mailroom, but that just shows the hazard that is created when people don't plow or shovel to get out in that area. So that's all I had.
Okay, thank you. We'll note for the record that Ms. Butler distributed 11 pictures to the council. Now, for additional input from any member of the audience or member of the council.
I have a quick question for you, Glenn. Who is responsible for bus stops?
If it's on the public right-of-way, we would be cleaning those.
So that's the responsibility, and I'm assuming most bus stops are on the public right away.
Yeah,
So that would be actually the responsibility of the city and not,
the property owner.
so we should maybe take
As
note
long
of
as
this
it's
bus
within
stop.
the curb area, curb to curb, the city normally maintains that. Now, if it's on the state highway,
That's a county road there.
yeah, and so we'd have to discuss that. But the bus stop on Saratoga Street would be ours.
Okay, so that's, the bus stop is the city's responsibility.
Yep.
Thank you.
My name's Al Gregg, and the reason for me coming up today is not to discuss the mobile home park, but the private, having the snow removed within 12 hours after it has ceased to be deposited. That is a short period of time. Let's just say it stops snowing around 11 o'clock at night. Okay? That means, to be in compliance with this, you need to be done by 11 o'clock in the morning. Well, I just called Turkey Valley today, and their start time is 4:37 in the morning. 4:37 in the morning. They got 130 people employed, about that number, at that time. So that would mean, because they aren't going to be able to get off in the early morning hours, they're going to be using a snow blower if they choose to purchase a house before 4:37. So in the neighborhood of 3 o'clock in the morning is about the only way you could comply with this ordinance. Well, I don't think you'd want to have your neighbor next door running their snow blower when you're trying to sleep in the middle of the night. So it doesn't seem like that is anywhere near enough time to get some, if you're a school teacher and you got to be dressed up and whatever, and you got to go to school early for preparations, you come home at night and you do the snow blowing, that seems like you're a reasonable posture. But under this, you could be written up, and if you go away for your kids' program in the cities, or you got to have a little more slack than 12 hours. That's really, I don't know how that number got put up there, but I think that's an unreasonable number.
Good, Glenn.
When I look at the ordinance, the 12 hours, that was there already.
For years.
It's not a change, that's already our policy. Okay. The other thing is, do you have an idea what you think would be a reasonable time other than the 12 hours?
Well, that would be something we'd have to take a look at, but because it's a part of this document to change things and improve them, you should look at the whole document. That's
Right.
what I'm trying to say. So you should go back and take a good look at what you're doing to the people that live here, making them in non-compliance just about automatic. And then when you prosecute, and Dennis goes there and you pick one out finally, and you don't do them all the same, where are you at there? That isn't a way to handle it. You should treat everybody the same. And so I think with the number that are non-compliant, it would be a major problem for you to just single out 2 or 3 and make it stick. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Al.
One question for you. And 12 hours, I think, is unreasonable, even though it's been there a long time. Could we change that to, say, and just hypothetically, 12-36 hours, between 12 to 36 hours? Or 48 hours or something?
Well, maybe it'd be good to let people know what the procedure is.
Okay.
The ordinance does say 12 hours. And then after 12 hours, after the last flake has fallen, you could complain to our department about that. And so then we have to send somebody out to either do the inspection or order the removal. That's another 12 to 24 hours. And in this case, this is a real different kind of snowfall that we've had in the last week, where it snows and then it quits, and then it snows and then it quits. And we've had someone that has said, well, I complained about it after the first 12 hours. Well, then it started snowing again. So then we do wait another 12 to let them do it. Then if they don't, then we look at it and say, yep, it needs to be removed. Well, in this case, it snowed again. So it's a little bit frustrating for the person who complained too, because they complained 3-4 days ago and it continued to snow off and on, and it hadn't finally quit yet for a period of time long enough for somebody to take care of it. So really, the 12 hours turns into 24, which turns into more like 36. Now, if you want to do a recommendation of something different, let's say it's 24, then we wait till after that. And so it would probably be the end of the week. Let's say it snowed on Monday, and if you gave them 36 hours, it's a day and a half, that's Wednesday. Then we have the complaint, it's Wednesday or Thursday, and then we go and have it done. So the earliest it probably would take place is Friday, but most likely the following Monday. Because then you'd be thinking about, well, you know, maybe somebody will come home, or maybe they'll have a friend do it on the weekend. So we really like to see compliance, and we do hate to have it done and billed, but that's just how it works. And I don't think it'll matter how many hours you give them. They're either going to do it or they aren't going to do it. That's kind of where we're caught up here.
Thank you. We'll go to public input, and likely there'll be lots of questions the council will have too.
My name is Christina Izquierdo. I live at 305 Timber Lane in Broadmoor Valley. As you'll recall, over the New Year's holiday, we had substantial snowfall. It took Mr. Shireholds several days to arrange to have the roads plowed, during which time Southwest Sanitation initially refused to provide trash removal services, and the city organized a secondary plan to have D&G plow ahead of any emergency vehicles. Residents were unable to get to work, causing missed pay and absenteeism, and that is just unacceptable. Residents of Broadmoor Valley pay city taxes and should not need a secondary plan in the event of an emergency. I've lived there for the last 6 years. In those past 6 years, I've seen a revolving door of park management, increasingly deteriorating roads, and homes that should be condemned. But the one consistency at Broadmoor Valley is Paul Shirehold's extreme neglect. The issue of snow removal is no different. Our resident association has attempted at least 8 good faith meetings with Mr. Shireholds, and we have been dismissed each and every time. This is not an issue that we can solve on our own, and without the city's intervention, Mr. Shireholds' dismissive attitude will undoubtedly continue, and this situation will not change. So I would ask you to please consider passing this ordinance to get us one step closer to the standards that the rest of the city of Marshall enjoys. Thank you.
My name's Greg Taylor. I'm here about several things, but hearing the conversations and talk around town before this night, private is probably what you're aiming at, and it's probably not in your existing ordinance, but I think you're penalizing everybody else in the meantime. And if it is a private area that's concerning you the most, it seems to be in the crowd, there's lots of other areas that need to be addressed that you have ordinances on, like abandoned buildings and things like that. And that leads me to my first question. If you've got a 12-hour ordinance now or a 24-hour ordinance now, has anyone ever been cited? I drive by sidewalks all the time that aren't plowed. Are you citing them? Have you cited them?
We've done the removals when we get complaints.
Mr. Mayor, I think it's important too to point out, and that's what my comment was going to be, is that the city doesn't actually go out and enforce that on their own. It's based on complaints. So if somebody complains about the sidewalk, it puts it into the package, but the city people don't go out, staff don't go out and look for the sidewalks.
Well,
The answer to your
on
question,
Main
Greg, is
Street,
yes.
East Main Street, there's old houses that aren't occupied that go for weeks. Well, I think you should start there before you start beating everybody else up, and I'm gonna get into that in a minute. 12 hours. Now, we've got 28 properties to do. We got them done today, just while I was coming to the meeting, and it wasn't a heavy, heavy snowfall. So the snow is falling 12 hours. What about snow blowing? So our policy is, and I doubt you've ever had any complaints on us, we don't start moving snow until the snow is done moving. And it takes us all of the hours in 12, we got it done, not because of your ordinance, because that's the time it takes. In 96, 97, I had to call Mike Gertz to come in with his twin blower to move the piles that we had piled up higher than this room, 60 feet through the air to the backyards, so we could pile more snow. We're not going to get that done in 12 hours. I had to wait 24 hours to get him, and he was working 14, 18 hours a day before he could get there. You better have some verbiage in there so that we don't have arbitrary and capricious enforcement with personality conflicts with certain people. Other people skate, and the certain ones don't skate. You know, if your real agenda here is to beat up some real offenders, start beating them up somewhere else. You've got all kinds of abandoned buildings out there. Whatever, I don't know. I don't go through there anymore because I can't afford to have my car ruined. But they are private streets. You don't want them? Buy them out. Close the place down. You won't have the problem. We don't need a 12-hour ordinance on snow. And who's going to decide when it quits falling? If it quits at 3 in the afternoon, we've got 12 hours, 3 in the morning, and then Alan's comment about the snow blowers going. How do you think our people would like to have our snow plows out in the parking lot with our blower going at midnight? And what about our insurance policy that raises our deductible to $5,000 if we damage a car in one of our lots after dark? How are you going to get people to work at midnight moving snow? It's crazy. I don't even know why, how could you even sit here and listen to it? 12 hours? The snow stops at 5 in the afternoon, you got 5 in the morning to get it out, and it's dark at 6?
And I think it's important to remember that the 12 hours is not a change. The 12 hours is.
Yeah, but you haven't enforced it the way it is.
Well,
I see
think
it.
that's the
You guys
discretion.
don't even get your streets done in 12 hours in a big storm.
So I'll interject here, Greg. I think that you've made your point. It was also explained by Glenn earlier. That might have been before you walked into the room.
No, I heard it, but
So-
you need
So
more
your
clear
point,
verbiage.
it has been clarified. You have a point, Glenn.
I just have a point. I just did a sampling, quick sample here of some communities, Hutchinson, St. Cloud, Wilmer, and all 3 of them have 24 hours. In fact, Wilmer changed theirs from 12 to 24 in, I think, 2013. So it seems like 24 hours is more the norm than 12. And so maybe the council should get consideration to
Thank you.
extending it to 24 hours.
Malia, did you have a point of clarification? And then,
Before, when I was writing this, I checked other cities, and Glenn is right. The 24 is the most common. There is one city which is 48, just one, and there is one city which is 12. But 24 is normal.
thank you for that clarification. You're next.
Hi. My name is Jesus Hernandez. I've been a resident of the park, Broadmoor Valley, for the last 18 years. In this problem that we're dealing with the roads and the snow removal, it's unfortunately been an ongoing problem for all these years. Also, unfortunately, it has gotten worse with the years. It seems like they've been neglecting those roads more and more, as the years pass. So my statement here is very or pretty much to back up Ms. Izquierdo's with the fact that there are families being affected by this situation, financially, emotionally, and also psychologically. You know, when you're leaving your children out there to wait for the school bus on a cold morning because the school buses can't get through the park. And they're also standing on the road. There is a busy road in the mornings. People are going to work. They're in a hurry. And one of the things that I want to point out is that roads connect communities. You know, when we're stuck in there for days without being able to access out or in, that makes us feel trapped in our own homes. Now, I don't know about this 12-hour or 24-hour rule, but what I know is when you're profiting with this property, you know, you're making money. We're paying our rent. We're paying our lots. I think we deserve some maintenance and some service that will ease some of the problems that I just mentioned. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak in the audience?
I'll just say Leroy Appleton instead of doctor. I'd like to explain the verbiage on that top paragraph. I read it and reread it. I'm wondering, it says you're going to bait the thing. Is the city going to do it, or do you hire it done?
Generally, we hire it.
And the second part is that if a bill is not paid, who presents the bill? The independent person that you have it, or the city?
We get the bill from the independent person, and that if it's not paid after we've billed it, then the administrator certifies it to the city council in the fall of each year.
I think that should have been clarified better in the wording. Not that I know what wording is, but it looks really ambiguous to me. I'm sorry. Read it over and just see what you think of it.
Okay, thank you, Doctor.
Hello, I'm Carol Carlson, and I own the property at 800-802 East College Drive. I live in Jean Avenue, where the snow removal is wonderful. I have no problems. My problem is that the sidewalk comes right next to the street, and then the state comes along, and it throws their snow, sand, salt, back onto the sidewalk, and we can't put it back on the street where it came from, so then it goes back up to the house, and we don't have that much space between the edge of the sidewalk and the house. And somebody blowing snow has even broken windows there, so I don't know how to get the state to work through this.
Glenn, do you have any comments on that? I mean, that's been that's really an issue on College Drive.
You know, we have a interesting situation on Main Street all the way out from, let's say, Hy-Vee to Couture's, where from First Street by the gas station to 6th Street, the state only owns the center 24 feet. And so everything in that section generally is removed by the city. The rest of Main Street is pushed to the side like all the other state routes are. And so it becomes the property owner's responsibility to move it from the sidewalk then off onto their own property. That's, I guess, the best explanation I can give you, but they don't haul it away. That's the difference that we have in those sections of Main Street.
Other people, anyone else in the audience wish to speak? Okay, questions, input as part of the public hearing from the council? Craig?
Mr. Mayor, based on the comments and that we've gotten through the public hearing and with Councilman Barakoler and with Ilya's comments about kind of the norm being 24 instead of 12, what would our process be? Would this have to go back in front of the legislative and ordinance, or can we do this in our next action?
Dennis, you can clarify, but that change would not be a substantial change in the intent of the ordinance, so that could be changed following the public hearing.
Address that in the subsequent
Right.
motion to
address
any changes, so that'd be fine.
That's my only question, Your Honor.
Council have other input as part of the public hearing?
I was in as somebody who pushes snow, 24 hours for sidewalks is the minimum. You know, you talk roads, because we're talking a private road here. 24 hours can get pushed in, because if you hire somebody D&G, they may still be pushing snow 24 hours later. I've had in front of my house, and the city does a wonderful job. This is by no means knocking our street department, but you get a lot of snow. Last April, I don't think they got their streets cleaned in 24 hours in the city marshal. We get a heavy snow and we can't even get our own streets done. And I have a problem asking our citizens, our property owners, to do something we ourselves cannot do. So I would look at this as a 24-36. We cannot ask our citizens to have higher standards than we ourselves can provide.
I think we covered that in here with, there's language that talks that it,
Is that section A, Mr. Mayor? It's because of the very last sentence, and Dennis, help us out there. It says this requirement shall not impose obligations on owners greater than those followed by the city of Marshall. So that's addressed there.
But that's a very gray area, because when you get into ice, and I'll use an example, I had the city a couple years ago salt one of my sidewalks because it was icy. Their streets are icy. I paid it. It was shoveled, but it needed to be salted. So that's a gray area to put in there. I'd rather put a time frame, so it's not a gray area. You got to have it done in 36 hours, like it or not.
I respect Mr. Taylor's comment about, personalities, and you don't ever want to put personalities into the enforcement, but I do think, looking at the history of how many of these have actually taken action where it's gone to that the city's actually had to put a contractor, it's really a pretty low number.
Real low.
And again, it's based on complaints, and then there's a follow-up with the city. So I'm hoping that calmer, wise heads prevail when these things come in and that these are taken into consideration. I hate to make it so cast in stone that we don't have the flexibility to be reasonable. And that's my hope. And I mean, I understand that there's always the potential, as Mr. Taylor's indicated, that you could have personalities involved. And at that point in time, I would hope that there'd be some type of appeal or some other sense prevail. But I think we need to be pretty consistent, or I think we absolutely have to be consistent with a period. And I like the 24 better than the 12, and I think there's been good measures stated for that. But I don't want to make it so cast that we don't have the ability to take situations into account and be adjusted.
Well, and that's where I would agree with the 24 for sidewalks, 36 for streets. Dennis, as an attorney, will tell you if you take something to court that's not black and white, it doesn't go over very well with the judge usually.
So the good comments, the clarification would be whether it's 12 hours or 24 hours, that is the beginning of the procedure. And as Glenn Olson explained, it's beyond that before action would be taken. At a recent council meeting, we did certify a few, it wasn't very many, but a few properties that were assessed for the cost of the snow removal in 2018. And quite honestly, those were, the majority of those were bank-owned properties where there was no occupant there, and it was a bank out of the area that didn't have a local management. So they just relied on the city to enforce their ordinance, and then they paid it. So, Glenn.
A few comments. What's on the screen over there is just a general background information. The ordinance is a lot more detailed than that. So if people are looking for more specific things, they can look at the ordinance, and it does cover the different details. The other thing is, we have two sides here. We have concerns about the homeowners and trying to get the sidewalk shoveled, but also pedestrians who want to walk on those sidewalks. they don't want to wait forever to walk on the sidewalk. Some of them have to walk to work, some have to walk to school. So, you know, you can't drag it on too long, otherwise they're going to be walking on icy sidewalks or icy roads. And so we have to think about that point too. And my last comment would be this. You know, this council has taken action at previous meetings where we've had open public meetings and then we've taken action. And then later we've had individuals express concerns that the council did something. It's important that we hear from you in public hearings like this. That's why we have them, and I'm certainly glad we have so many people turn up here tonight to express your feelings, because we'd rather hear your ideas and concerns before we take formal action rather than after. That's more constructive. And it really does help us a lot to hear from you and hear what your concerns are. So thank you for coming here tonight. I know it's cold out there, and it really helps the council in making good decisions if we hear input from the public. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Glenn.
Yeah, I have another question. I called you earlier because the Minnesota statute, and I'm just trying to make sure we do this right, states snow, ice, and rubbish removed from sidewalks. When you say health and safety, at what point does a snowfall become health and safety, or snowfall is a nuisance? I mean, I'll use the city of St. Paul, for example, our state capital. They don't plow their streets unless there's over 6 inches of snow. So at what point does it become a nuisance, and what point does it become a health and safety? I think we need to figure that out too.
The health and safety statute used for this ordinance amendment deals with the ability to collect through a special assessment levy. There is a separate statute under Minnesota law in Chapter 160, specifically dealing with snow removal, giving road authorities in an emergency situation, you can plow any road, public or private, for snow removal purposes. And I think public health safety issues, if you cannot get emergency vehicles in there, if you cannot get buses in there, if you cannot get utility vehicles in there, that's an emergency. That gives local authority, road authorities, to clear any road because of health and safety issues.
So to get back to health and safety, with one lane plowed, he would be in compliance of that health and safety statute.
Can you get an emergency vehicle in there? Yes, I think one lane would count. Yeah.
And that's where I think we need to get that clarified so we don't end up.
But also there's a number of photographs provided to.
Well, I saw those.
Which were not
Correct.
Even one lane.
You're
And I
correct,
think in
but
that
that's-
situation, and the city has taken that proactive approach before, if we need to get an emergency vehicle in, we'll lead you in.
I just want to have the ordinance done up so we're not ending up in, we plow this thing curb to curb, and a property owner says, well, I'm not paying that, because that's not what the statute says, because technically he's correct.
Greg, if you ought to come up to the microphone. Thank you.
One of the verbiage changes, and it doesn't have anything to do with me, it says abated by the owner or tenant of the abutting or surrounding respectively private property. What about your properties like stores, warehouses, machine shops, houses, where the owner lives in Springfield, Minnesota, or Springfield, Missouri, or La Jolla, California, and he rents out the house, and the tenant has all of the responsibility through contract. Has anybody talked about that? The owner isn't here.
That's a good point. What?
Yes.
Glenn?
Thank you.
Our policy is that we bill the owner, and if they've got a contractual responsibility with the tenant, that the tenant has to do it, that's between them. We don't want to get involved with any tenant leases. So we do charge the owner.
Dr. Affolter.
I'm not going to complain because Glenn knows I don't like that word. I'll report some things, maybe specifically. As an example, there's on the corner of Lion and B Street, the sidewalk goes on that side of the street, and there's a driveway on the first property. the sidewalk is not cleared from their driveway to the street. You can't get from the street, by walking up to his driveway and going in. Is it dangerous? Yeah, because now the kids are walking more in the street. Now, how do you do that? It was over by Holy Redeemer School, or church rather, at the concert they had last Christmas time. And that corner on 5th and Lion, same thing. It wasn't cleared. It wasn't cleared for days until we bumped funeral, and they finally got around to it. So it's an issue that you report it, or who's going to clear it, who's going to do it. The other thing, not too much has been said about the safety and things of downtown. Now, they clear the sidewalks, but I don't know if they're afraid. I was down there for 55 years, so I know something about it. But all the posts that are there, all the planters, are not cleared up to the planter or on top of it. Now, it's going to be June before that stuff melts off. Now, we're going to have St. Patrick's Day parade in 16th of March. And the kids are going to be kind of picking up candy. And you got all that snow packed around those poles. They clear the sidewalks where you walk partially. You sometimes can't even reach over to press the button because they're not enforcing the total clearance. All the hitching posts down there in the corner of the Main Street and College Drive in front of the smoke shop, they're all full of snow yet. Now, what are we going to do about it as citizens of Marshall? We have the street department. We have the park and rec department. We have, as paper today said, we have the employees. Now, I'm going to throw this out as a thought. For the citizens of Marshall who have a downtown Marshall, can't we have a Saturday morning dig out cleanup downtown time? Block off one side of the street from, say, 9 until 10:30. Out the golf courses last year, we had 10, 15 guys that spent 2 mornings trimming trees voluntarily. It was a labor of love for these guys. There was a Labatt that did a lot of it. Not this one. But it's a matter of if we drive down our street in Main Street, it looks tacky. And is it going to stay that way until June? Or can we get a volunteer group together a Saturday morning, clean off one side, finish it, clean off the other side, and then go to the Wooden Nickel or the Gambler and have coffee or something? But we can get the citizens of Marshall to finally look at their downtown, because the city can't do it. That was said. It's too much work. I mean, they've got enough work to do it to get the streets. You haven't taught, but we really look tacky down there. If we really look at it, I've had people. I mentioned it at Christmas time, that thing that you couldn't get by the smoke shop down there. And I told somebody, well, I've noticed that. Nothing was done. I called Dean Kudrin, and the next day it was cleared out. But either he didn't complain about it, I reported it. And so we've got to get our citizens involved as well as they through their own neighborhoods. But we've got to have our downtown. Red Baron, I'm sure that's cleaned up. But what do we got downtown? It looks really terrible. So just look at it when you go home, okay?
Thank you, Leroy.
Leroy, there's a Downtown Business Association group.
We talked about that.
Yeah, you should have this speech with them.
I talked about that, but we have people there that are more interested in the ladies' sales coming up than really talking about downtown. Because I'm still a member there too, so.
Thank you. Interesting point. Other input as part of the public hearing?
Mr. Mayor, we've had some very constructive comments and all assets, whether it's sidewalks or streets or whatever. Would it make more sense to send this back to L&O and have them really go through it? And before we go past an ordinance, an adoption of an ordinance that we're going to regret maybe later on, to get back? I mean, we've heard some good comments tonight, whether it's the 12 hours, whether it's the 24 hours, whether it's 36 hours, what's a private street, what's not a private street. I don't want to postpone it or linger it any longer than anybody else, but should we send this back to L&O? That's my question.
John?
I guess serving in L&O, I would say I'm not sure that there, other than the 12 hours to 24 hours, I would be in favor of that change. I'm not sure I'd change anything else in there, because we do have the inclusion that's new, that says requirement should not be imposed obligations greater than what the city is. And I think that covers quite a bit of it. You know, we're never going to cover every detail in this ordinance for every possibility that comes in every street and every business or in any, you know, home environment. We're trying to do as much as we physically can. We're trying to give people as much reasonable amount of time as we can. But, you know, same as what we heard before, there's people that do need to get down the sidewalk. We haven't talked about anybody that's in a wheelchair trying to get through this. It's pretty tough. Quite often I see people on bicycles getting around because they do need to get around, and sometimes a bicycle is the only way to do it. And that's it. So, you know, we are trying to walk a pretty fine line here in some areas, but we're trying to be reasonable. But yet, you know, the point is get the sidewalks clean, get the streets clean, let people through. You know, I think if it's a 1 lane versus 2 lane, that may be another issue later on, but at least get it open so that people can get through, they can get to work, kids can get to school. That's really the bigger thing. And honestly, I don't know that of anything other than the 12 hours in this ordinance that I would change in L&O. So.
Thank you, John. We are still in the public hearing. Comments?
I'm on the L&O committee too, and I would agree with John's comments. And I think, you know, this is our snow season, and if we're going to do something, I think we need to get it going now and not wait till summer to get a policy in effect here. So I think that it's important to move forward with the changes.
Any other input as part of the public hearing?
The only thing, and I actually agree with Russ, is as we look at this, I don't believe our ordinance is going to fit into state statute, plain and simple. I think we could end up back at this in 6 months. Maybe it'll be 6 years before we have a huge snow, a lot of snow in the winter. Dennis and I had chatted about this, you know, it's to get emergency vehicles through, that's 1 lane. We start plowing these streets curb to curb, he gets the bill, we could end up in court over this. I think the ordinance needs to be fixed, not fixed, but needs to get more specific on what actually is a private street and what we can do on private streets. They're private streets for a reason. I don't know who said it, Greg said it, I think. If we want them to be public streets, then we need to make them public streets.
Any other input as part of the public hearing? If not, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So move.
I'll second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by John to close the public hearing. Discussion on that motion. If not, we will move to a vote. Voting is closed. The motion does pass. We will now then move to the next agenda item, which is agenda item number 4. This would be to consider the adoption of the ordinance that was, which is the amendment to section 62-2, ice and snow.
Mr. Mayor, I would make a motion to approve the ordinance with 1 change, and that's changing the ordered clear period from 12 hours to 24 hours.
Motion by Craig. Is there a second?
I will second.
Seconded by John. Discussion on that motion.
Would you like the notice, excuse me, would you like the notice to be then by the city to 36 or leave that at 24?
Say that again.
In the second paragraph, B, as in boy, the city then currently uses 24 hours for notice. Do you want that to be left at 24 or extend to 36?
Yeah, I think so. I think the only change I was looking for is the 12 to 24, not the 24 to 36.
I guess I would just ask before that, Glenn, are you having a recommendation of one or the other, or just asking a question?
No, I like the idea of the extension of 24 from the 12. We've always been hesitant to start at 12, so I like that. And either one is fine on the other one for us.
Other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote on the motion. All votes in, the voting is closed. And the motion does pass. We will move then to agenda item number 5. This is also a public hearing. This is a public hearing on the ordinance amendment to section 86-96A agricultural district. Once again, I'll ask Ilya Gutman to present this item for public hearing.
Thank you, Mayor Council. So this thing came into front of the council in November when there was a presentation about having an archery range in the city. There was a presentation showing what it is for, and how it will look like. And the council liked that idea, and the staff was tasked with finding the way of doing it in the place where it was proposed, which is south of Merit Center. We looked at how it may work, and that area is zoned I-2 industrial district, which does not allow archery ranges. So the best way we figure out would be to kind of three-step approach. First, change the ordinance to allow archery ranges in agricultural district. Second, change that as a conditional use permit. Second, change that area where the archery range is proposed to agricultural district, because all parks in the city are agricultural districts. And third is to go through conditional use permit for the archery range in that particular agricultural district area. So right now we're in public hearing for the first step of that process, meaning change of the ordinance to add archery ranges as a conditional use in agricultural districts.
Thank you, Ilya. The input from either the audience or the council as part of this public hearing? If not, is there a motion to close this public hearing?
So move.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Steve to close the public hearing. Discussion? If not, we will move to a vote on the motion to close the public hearing. Votes in. We'll close the voting. The motion does pass. Move then to the next agenda item, which is agenda item number 6, which is consider adoption of the amendment to the section 86-96A, which is what the public hearing was on that Ilya just presented. Questions on that ordinance?
I move adoption of the amendment.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, we will move to a vote. Motion does pass. Move then to agenda item number 7. This is a public hearing on the vacation of easements in Commerce Industrial Park. Calling Glenn to present this item for public hearing.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. If you could pull up page 26. Okay. The red area that you see in the lower right-hand portion used to be we used to have a lot 2 in the subdivision, and since we developed it, that lot has gone away, and so before we record the revised Commerce Industrial Park plat, we want to vacate the existing easements that used to be around lot 2. There are no utilities in those easements, and we would recommend approval of the vacation. If you have any questions.
Any questions as part of the public hearing? This was originally sectioned off because it was reserved for the Marshall Municipal Utilities for a potential water tower or something, and they have
Relocated that request down to the south side of Michigan Road.
So there's no need to have this separated.
That's correct.
Any other input as part of the public hearing?
I move we close the public hearing.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Close voting. And the motion does pass. We'll now move then to agenda item number 8. This will be the vacation of those easements in Commerce Industrial Park, the adoption of the resolution authorizing the vacation.
I'd make that motion.
Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Russ. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Close the voting. Motion passes. Okay. Move then to agenda item number 9. This would be considered the award of the bids for Phase 2 of the Merit Center driving track. Glenn?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We did receive bids for the Phase 2 part of the driving track, which included the extension of the driving track itself, the construction of a skid pad just to the east side of the existing concrete pad, and also included 3 alternates, those being a cold storage building, a cul-de-sac area for training, and fencing around the perimeter of the site. After review with the Director of Public Safety and the Merit Center Coordinator, it was recommended to approve the base bid and the alternates B and C, which were the cul-de-sac and the cold storage building, and to recommend not to award the fencing. So Jim Marshall is here from Department of Public Safety. If you have any questions concerning the items that they recommended to be awarded, I will say it was kind of an interesting bid opening because we had 3 general contractors, and the first one that we opened, the base bid was significantly over the total amount that we had available. And so the second one that we opened then was the apparent low bidder, which was $1.1 million lower than the high bidder. The next one we opened was within $300,000 of the low bidder. So we did define that all of them were bidding the same project. That's always nice to see. So if you have any questions concerning what's being recommended for award, Jim is here to explain that as well.
Thank you, Glenn, and Jim, you may want to prepare to come up, but just an additional comment on that, that also underscores that we did have competitive bids, and we are fortunate in this community that 2 of those competitive bidders, the 2 low bidders, are local contractors.
And not only are they local contractors, the subs that they use are local contractors. So it's not only their bidding process, but it does affect the community as a whole.
So questions?
Jim, I have a question, or maybe Glenn, on the cold storage building. Tell me, I mean, it's a building that's 896 square feet, cold storage, and yet it's going to cost us about almost $164 a square foot to build. To me, that seems expensive for a cold storage building.
I can maybe help on that to start with. It does include not only the cold storage building, but 2 pages of associated work, which includes the excavation and embankment work, the gravel work, geotextile fabric, the Class 5, the asphalt around it, 270 ton of asphalt, a culvert through the approach to it, and the end sections, a silt fence for the constructability, seeding and mulching around the disturbed area, and striping, and then the building itself. So the other thing about it is there's a lot of things other than just the structure. And if you take a look at and you try to coordinate the building of the building and that surrounding area with all the other construction work going on of excavation with big heavy equipment around there, you generally don't want to manage 2 or 3 or 4 contractors in that mix. Even though it will cost you a management cost for RNG to do that with his subs, it will. We believe that to get the job done by one contractor coordinating everything would be better for public safety than not.
Thank you for that clarification. I mean, it makes a lot more sense when you say it includes a lot more than just a building, because
Yeah,
in my mind, is a building there because we need it? Is a building there, is it a nice want? Is a building going to be built because we have the money? That was all questions in my mind, and especially, and again, I'm not in the construction business, and it just seemed high to me
Yeah.
for a cold storage
It was.
building.
So question for
Yeah.
perhaps Sharon, perhaps Annette. There's $3.1 million that is available through the state bonding dollars that will be available as a reimbursable expense to the city after the construction is done and the invoices for payment have been submitted, right?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So we get reimbursed on a monthly basis, so whatever we submit for payment, so I don't even think it's going to be 2 weeks in between from when we pay it and when we get reimbursed.
Okay.
Yep, they have a whole process, and they kind of laid it out for us, and it should go really smooth.
So it isn't like we have to carry the, $2.8 million of expense until the key is
Yes,
turned.
it'll be done on a monthly basis.
Thank you.
Yep.
And going back to your question, Russ, the cold storage was an add-on near the end of the negotiations, but it is a requirement within the facility as described within the $3.1 million grant.
The building is required, we have to have the building to get the
You have to
grant.
complete the facility, which includes cold storage.
It's,
Facility.
the cold storage building is to provide for the other artifacts for the track and the support of the track.
And just curious, what was the reason for not awarding the fencing? Did we not want it fenced around, Jim, or?
Jim, you can address that. Chief Marshal.
Because again, with that, even with the fencing, we still would have been below the 3.1 million.
Right, thank you, Mayor and Council. This has been an interesting process, obviously a learning process for me and working with Glenn on this a little bit, but when we first received the estimates from the engineers of what that fencing was going to be, I kind of sat back and kind of had the conversation with Glenn. I said, from the very beginning of the project, the phase one part of this project, we've really never had any issues. The only issue we had was one time when it was dirt work being done on the project where some guys got in with their pickups. Since the completion of phase one, we've never had any issues or complaints of people accessing that part of the track. And it just seemed like an incredible expense for $200,000 for fencing that I don't know if we necessarily need. I think I had told Glenn at the time some good signage and maybe aggressive enforcement if we have to. We can save that $200,000.
There are going to be some other things that will be necessary too. We have not addressed it yet at this time, the things that have to go with it, like 100 safety cones, some barricades, the small stuff that would be stored in that cold storage building. We still haven't really addressed that, and we didn't want to until we got the bids in. So we are considering contingencies, and all those other things too are a part of the grant.
And they'll come in as change orders, right?
They will.
That's how this works, right?
We'll be discussing that. But they'll probably be authorized as individual purchases rather than change orders to the RNG contract.
I am, Chief Marshal, am pleased to hear you say that, the vandalism and that type of thing really hasn't been an issue. The elimination of a, chain link fence around basically a quarter section of
Right.
land where you're in the wide open and we know what the wind is like and the corn stalks, and you probably will avoid quite a bit of maintenance costs.
Right, all the land that surrounds it is pretty secluded. It's tillable, really farmland, except maybe on the east side that goes up against those houses off of Highway 59. The only real access to it is right off the front of Highway 33. There's a little, I don't want to call it a little grassy berm. I have nothing to do with the grassy moles.
Right.
But yeah, that's the only place where you can really get access to it. There is a portion, maybe 150 feet of fence that prevents you from getting access on the tar entrance to it, but we've never had any issues to this point.
It was an interesting conversation when we actually sat down. We're kind of looking at some of the issues, and I got the privilege of being part of some of those conversations. And Jim and Jasmine and I were talking about, you know, that perimeter fence, and the types of vehicles that are going to really be interested in trying a 90-mile-an-hour lap around the north end of that are not going to be the vehicles that will be able to off-road to get on there. So,
Those vehicles are also extremely loud.
yeah, when we catch you out there with your Mustang, all they got to do is block about 3 points, and you drive as fast as you want. You're not getting out.
Thank you.
So,
I'm just glad we're talking about a fence and not a wall.
Glenn?
I just have a quick question on this. There's the $3.1 million, and as the council member mentioned before, that, you know, the fence is within the budget. So if we don't build a fence at this time and it's needed in the future, the money would come out of our own pocket, not the state money. Is that correct?
or some future state funding.
If we get it.
If we get it.
But, you know, and I'm not for wasting money if you don't need it.
Right.
But if it is a safety concern and a fence is needed, I mean, right now, the state money is available. It's not going to be available necessarily later, for sure. And so.
I believe there's a 10-year window before the project would be finally closed out at the state level, and certainly
Correct.
it can be closed out sooner than that.
So the state money is available for that long?
To me, I thought it was 2 years.
I'm not sure on that question, but we also have to remember there are other expenses that are not included in that 2.8 million. I believe we have some spent for the blueprints or someone to do the
Testing.
architectural. So I think there's at least 100,000 that we've kind of already kind of spent on this grant.
Yep.
So I'm not saying there's not going to be enough for the fencing, but I think
some priorities need to be established by the Department of Public Safety and the Merit Center for acquisition of things. I'll give you a good example. An electric opener for that gate, that is a brute to open up by hand. It's like 24 feet long, and I have a tough time opening it.
And
So
part of that is
things
that we
like
don't have keys floating around for padlock.
Right. And even if you have a key, to open that padlock, it's very difficult to get off. So,
Other questions?
some things
Yes.
like that.
So if we get this project done, you know, to go back to Glenn's thing, is if we have money left for the fence, we could take a look at it then. But to remember, with this much fencing, there's also a lot of maintenance. You get a winter like this with
Yep.
snow will
Yep.
take a fence like that down.
Mhm.
Or bend it or
It's
wreck
funny,
it.
chain link fence does create a bank,
It does, and the snow, I've seen the snow take those, pound those poles right into the ground.
so.
Good discussion. Any other discussion? If not, you have the recommendation.
I move approval of the award of the bids to RNG Construction.
Motion by Greg, seconded by Russ. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Votes all in, voting's closed. Oh, I'm sorry, voting's not closed. Reopen voting,
I thought mine was in.
then everyone hit refresh. Everyone vote again. Now we'll close voting. The motion does pass. We'll move on then to the next agenda item, which is the consent agenda. If we bring the items up on the screen that are for the consent agenda. And they include consider the authorization to declare vehicles as surplus property for the police department, the surplus property for the police department, the Merit Center, State of Minnesota amendment to the lease number 2, consider the resolution authorizing the transfer of surplus funds and the closure of debt service fund 366, consider the application for on-sale intoxicating liquor license for Marshall Convention and Visitors Bureau for an event March 9, 2019. Consider ratifying an application for an on-sale intoxicating liquor license for the Marshall Convention and Visitors Bureau from February 7, 2019 to February 12, 2019. And then finally consider the approval of the bills and the project payments. So is there any item on the consent agenda any member of the council wants to remove for purposes of separate discussion?
Number 12, please.
Number 12? 13.
16.
We'll pause for a second and while Kyle moves those items. Okay, so you have the remaining items on the consent agenda, minus what was agenda item number 12, 13, and 16. Any further discussion? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion.
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion by John, seconded by Russ. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Close voting. Motion does pass. We'll now then move to agenda item 12, surplus property for the police department. Steve, that was you. Right?
Yeah, Jim, these bikes sold in Marshall, donated, or will be taken to altars. So there's a big thing I always see in the cities that does a bike. They get donated bikes and fix them up, and there's a, you know, like Leroy said, there's a huge component of the community up there that makes it and donates them to kids of need. So I just want to make sure we explore that option of getting them up there, because I think altars should be the last choice.
No, good question. We do that. We allow our Sentence to Serve program to come and go through the bikes that they want, and we also let the high school. So we kind of go back and forth which one gets first choice before we do that. So they are used, and they go through the ones that are really usable. Some of them, you know, there's just no saving, but we do try to do that, and that's
perfect.
I'm glad to do that.
Very good. Thank you. With that,
I'd motion to approve it then.
Second.
motion by Steve, seconded by Craig. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Close voting. The motion does pass. So we'll now move to agenda item number 13. Glenn, was that you?
Yeah, I had some question about the rental amount. Is this the second year then of the rental agreement? And
Second or third? I think it might be the third. 'Cause the first year was real partial.
Could be, yes.
Well, I was wondering if we've looked into and determined what the Department of Public Safety pays at other locations for the same type of service that we're providing to them, and is the $125 a month amount a reasonable amount, or are we on the low side? And it'd be nice to know what other communities or other organizations are charging the Department of Public Safety for a similar service.
Sure, good question. I don't know the answer to that. I can check into it for you if you want.
I can give a partial answer to that too, is that, and I know John's going to have some input too because he was on Merit Commission when this started. Initially, the driver's exam station was using part of a new development that hadn't been developed. Then there were a few homes and properties that were developed out there, and then it started to cause some traffic concerns, not so much with the giving the test, but people would understand what the test route was, and then they started doing driver's training, so it became kind of a classroom. Now, we don't allow that type of practice on the track, but basically the city was not charging the Department of Public Safety or the driver's license exam station for the permit to use that testing route. So basically there was a group of tests that were not even being offered in Marshall, mostly for CDL. And so companies in Marshall, both in the transportation of passengers for passenger bus and then also CDLs for truck and trailer, were either having to go to Jackson or to Wilmer for their tests. And that's really expensive because you have to have the vehicle, you have to have someone who has a current license and the person taking the test. And so I think we're one of the only communities that actually offers up a closed track to be used, and it's only for the skills portion. It's for backing, parking, and maneuvering commercial vehicles. They're not doing a lot else, so they're using the skill pad. There is some burden on the street department because they have a schedule that they put on our scheduling program to say when they are going to be doing tests. And then within 24 hours before that, the street department makes sure that the track is plowed. So that becomes kind of a priority. But there was a pretty good discussion about how do we do this without putting a burden. At first, it was going to be offered up basically for nothing, and the state requested that they want a contract, they want to pay, they're used to having it. So it was agreed that it was based on, I think, $10 a test with an average of 12 tests a month or 13 tests a month is kind of how it came out. And that's something that former Chief Yant had negotiated with some guidance from the mayor and a couple other people on what would seem equitable. So that, I think, is how we got to that.
Thanks, Craig. That was a good explanation.
I guess I would appreciate if you'd check into it.
Yep,
And
I will do that.
It's too late now for this
Sure.
one, but in the future, next year, we're going to go through the same process. And it would be nice to know what is being paid in other communities to make sure we're in the ballpark. And
Good question, and Councilman Schaefer's history of this reminds me of some of the conversations that took place a few years ago, difficult conversations with the commercial businesses that were sending their drivers to Wilmer,
Right.
paying drive time, and they really kind of voiced their frustration with us at that time, so.
It was pretty hot.
Was.
And rightly
It was.
so, rightly so. It's, it's their tax dollars contribute to this too.
But it's good to be informed as to what
Yeah.
we're doing
Oh,
here
yeah.
and find out if we're in the ballpark as far as the amount we're charging. So,
Oh,
thank
John,
you.
had a-
Yeah, I just sort of comment that it wasn't so much in regards to the amount we're charging, but it just comment that it is a considerable savings to the community to have this available. And yeah, remember the discussions with Community Transit and a couple other organizations that it's quite expensive to send somebody off to Wilmer or Jackson or wherever. So, to me, the ability to have it here is probably worth more than anything we'd ever collect at a lease, although it's a good idea to have a very, common.
Certainly, it's a service that should be provided in the regional center.
Right, but, the state, if we're providing this service to the state too, and we just want to be compensated at the same rate that other communities are, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think we can accomplish both. We can serve our local community, but at the same time, get a reasonable rent for our facility. And maybe what we're charging now is reasonable, but it'd be nice to know if it is.
Sure.
And if we're undercharging, and the state should be willing to pay what the reasonable rate is, and still do it. So, thank you.
question.
Any other discussion on this item?
I guess I would agree with Councilman Bearcoller. I'd like to see some statistics. Craig, you made reference to 10 tests a month. Are we doing 10 tests a month? Are we doing 20? Are we doing 5? Or whatever. It'd be nice to have some history to go forth so we can make a judgment. I looked at this, and if we have to go on clear snow now with all the snow that we've got, it's probably going to cost us to send a plow out there, to send a loader, more than $125 in the city time to go out there. It's not going to be a moneymaker, but at least hopefully we maybe over the course of the year maybe cover our expenses.
Just a point of clarification on that, council member. They're not the only tenant. They're not the only people that are using that track. We have other tenants that rent at the Merit Center, and that track gets used by the commercial vehicle program through Minnesota West. And so, I mean, the track would be plowed anyway. It's just that the street department looks at the schedule and makes sure that the next one up after the slot, that there's timing in there, or there's at least communication about if that track can't be cleared. But the driver's test isn't the only tenant out there in the wintertime.
And I echo that, excuse me, Mayor, but again if the state is willing to pay, I don't want to gouge the state either, but if you have somebody that's willing to pay, maybe they'll pay $150 a month, maybe they'll pay $200 a month. I'd like to see the usage figure.
Sure.
Yep.
Do that.
So we've had good discussion. I would entertain a motion.
I move we approve.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion?
I think everybody's discussion thus far has been good. I like the idea. It's been $125 for the past couple of years. Going forth next year, no matter what it is, it might be reasonable to increase it because God knows everything for the state gets increased, so.
Any other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Voting's closed. That motion does pass. We'll Move then to agenda item number 16.
This is more of a housekeeping thing for me, but we're moving this date to today. Is it necessary to even have this voted on since it was voted on the 7th? They had to move it because of severe weather. I mean, I just curious, 'cause obviously the event is going on right now.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Short answer, yes, we do need to. The state requires council to ratify the action that was taken on the 23rd to this event date. This license is already approved by the state of Minnesota for tonight, but they do need the follow-up paperwork.
So then just be devil's advocate here, if it would have had a bad storm today and we had to push this off for a week, what happened? We just still
We would have
approve
done it, we would have ratified it again for a later date, but that was talked about this morning, but the ultimate decision was to have the event
And that's
tonight.
fine. So they always have, we just can't move the date. Good enough. I make a motion to approve.
Motion by Jim.
Second.
Second by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Close the voting. Motion passes. We'll have to be considerate of Kyle if we make him come up and talk and then make him go back. And
I only hit the button 7 times to refresh. I thought he did it pretty fast.
So with that, we will move to agenda item number 18, the change order authorization. Glenn?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Recently, we did have a vote on the change order process, which was denied because it was a 3-3 vote. Now that you're all here, I hope we don't have that same problem. But we put together a couple of recommendations. The first one is real similar to what we had before, with change orders approved by the director or his designee, up to 5%, which is the contingency amount. It's also an amount that is already pre-funded for the project. The next one is the additional $25,000 over that. That is allowable under our current policy for procurement or purchasing policy, that $25,000. And then after that, it would be city council approval. And we always want the final change order and payment to be approved by council, always. And of course, those change orders may be negative. You've actually seen a few of those. So we want that to be there. The other thing we want to make sure is that the council is aware of what we're doing. So any change order that we are authorizing, we would put in the packet for your information. I think it's important to recognize that all projects are not, no projects are without change orders, either plus or minus. And there has to be some acknowledgement of your staff that works on the projects that has to work there, and it's either something was missed or we found something new or lots of different reasons for changes. Just direct quantities, you run into quantity changes on contaminated soils during the course of the project. So I think this still puts a limit on that amount. It's also, in our opinion, a variable change order amount because that 5% changes with every contract. We did put a alternative there with a sliding scale that could also be used, but really what we're doing now isn't very functional. We come to this council with change orders of work that's already been done within the contingencies amounts, and we're always seriously considering why is that. And I think that if it's within that contingency amount, this council has always worked, and you kind of throw up your hands and say, okay, it's already done. I'm not going to go to court over saying no. But that's something that you have to trust your staff, whoever it is, for some of that. So that's our recommendation, and we'd certainly take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Glenn, for your recommendation. We'll open it up for discussion. Steve, you had your hand first.
Sure. So, when this first came up, I voted no, and I'll tell you the reason that I voted it. The biggest reason was historical. The Red Baron Arena was fraught with contingency and change order after change order after change order. And I was not on the council at that time. And as a citizen, I look at this and I'm thinking, who the heck planned this thing? Who designed it? Because all these change orders should have been thought of. I'm a doctor. I'm not a contractor, construction guy. But when I go to do a procedure, all my eggs are in a row. All the tools I need to complete the job of the procedure is already built in. God help me if I don't have that. And so that was one of the big things that came to me. And, it really sits in my craw, Glenn. And so ultimately, I think change orders are part of any project. Having supervised my own home being built and things, you see things that are built and there's things that you can't anticipate that cost you, and some things get done cheaper than the project. So I agree with it. But we got to plan it. And so ultimately, if there's a change order that comes in, and I'll give you an example, when the engineering department missed something on a road that is part and parcel that is on every project, and the engineering department missed it. Unacceptable. So that I can vote for this resolution as written, with the caveat that ultimately if things come up on final change orders or you're coming to the council over and over, it'll reflect on, we'll let Sharon take care of it, because our job is not to micromanage. Our job is to grossly manage the 10,000-foot view. It'll fall to Sharon, who will pass it down along the line to get this thing fixed. So that's where I come from, and that's where my vote initially came from in the no vote, because I wanted people to understand that. After talking to a couple of people, it's a historical thing, and yes, I don't think our job is to micromanage, but let it be said that it's Sharon's job as the administrator to manage that and to manage it well, and you guys are the hired professionals and so when I see things like, we forgot this liner or whatever, that falls with that's a checklist thing. We should never miss a checklist thing.
Greg?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Meister, very nicely stated. Thank you. The Red Baron Arena, the gift that keeps on giving. Okay? Just a couple, yeah, exactly. Yeah, the flu, the cold, and snow. In defense first is that facility in its conception, and when those contracts were deliberately let, and made a very confusing and laborious project. And it was done, and this is for the public that's out there listening and is going to listen, because we've touched this. This is probably the single best lightning rod in the community yet, and it's a little bit troubling, but I get it. To include a number of contracts locally, we became the general, knowing that there were going to be change orders. And as that project developed, as marketing and promotions were sold, good, bad, or indifferent, there were things that could be added in. There were options and enhancements. A lot of those change orders were that. Some of the other change orders were problems. Mm-hmm. And when I wish you could have all been at the closeout meeting to finally settle the account on the Red Baron Arena and Expo, because that was probably, and I've been in a lot of negotiations in the 29 years of my professional employ with the state, that was probably one of the tougher ones. And the people who I believe caused the negative change orders that weren't part of enhancements in planning, but were exactly what Dr. Meister's describing, somebody not doing their job, they left skin on the table. I don't think they left enough. They felt like we took limbs. So I think it was probably a pretty good negotiation, because I left a little bit disappointed and they left angry, but it was settled. And so I agree with you. I think that's the process it should take in holding people accountable. I also appreciate the fact that in order for these projects to move forward, we can't bring everything to council prior to those actions taking. And that's really what we're doing here. And we are truly putting this in our city administrator's hands and then the professional staff underneath. And that's why we do performance evaluations and and do reviews, and that's why we hire the people that we hire. So I appreciate the fact that the one thing that one of my Mayor Burns's favorite sayings that I appreciate is beauty of being an elected body. We can fix things that we think we need to fix even after we did them the first time, and so here we are. So thank you for that.
Very well stated.
This is, and I brought this up to Jason, I think 3-4 months ago about change orders, because I think, I agree with you, Dr. Minister, Craig, voting on every change order doesn't make sense. When I do a construction project, we build in a contingency, and it's there, it's part of the bid. I don't go back to every builder, I'm usually the builder because we build spec houses, but we don't question it. We have it built into this. I think this is a good change for our staff. Like I said, I brought this up to Jason 4 months ago. Not that we need to shorten our city council meetings, but I don't think we need to beat up on these change orders at every city council meeting. I do agree with you, Steve, like you said, if you forget products out of the process, that's where Sharon's gonna say, well, this is not good, we need to change this. That's why she makes the big bucks, because that's her job too.
One of the reasons.
So I think, if I would have been here back in January, I would have supported this at this time. I'd like the, tweaks. I also like the fact it's less than 5%. I think in a $2 million project, 5% is way too much. We need to lower that contingency as it gets higher, because it does rein in costs by not having, 5% on a $2 million project is $100,000. Here we're looking at $60,000 instead of $100,000. So hopefully it does rein in, and I'm not saying the city overspends, but that's in the back of their minds on these budgets. I don't have a 5% contingency, I now have a 3%, or whatever that amount equals to. So I will support this. I think it's good for our staff and gives our city administrator more responsibility.
John?
Just mostly comment on the Red Baron, in little addition to what Councilman Schaefer had brought up. Glenn Olson told us in the beginning, because we were the general manager, he would be bringing a lot of change orders. And he told us that in the very beginning, and some of us weren't around here at the time on the council at that point. But, we were warned of that. We were explained why, is because he was doing a general contractor work, which I really got to stress, I really do believe that saved the city in the area of about $1 million due to his work. And I know Glenn at times probably felt like he got beat up on it, and I don't know if he'd ever do it again. As being a general contractor, that part I don't think he would. But, this was done in that particular reason. And yes, there's some good change orders and there's some bad change orders. One of the reasons they all came here is because we didn't have this policy.
Yeah.
And, they got a little tiring, but, some of them, it was, when you connected all the dots, it was very obvious. You changed this, let's change that, let's change that. We had to move a plug because the sign was now added, and do this, and we had to do that because the blocks weren't there. And so, there was all reasons for it that were good. To me, it tells me that it's a living document and it's a living building when we are actually looking at change orders. I get more concerned if there's no change orders, because then somewhere's along the line, somebody padded too much something into it, and shouldn't have. So I'm in favor of this change. I think it's high time to do it, and I'm for it. And if we're at a point, I'd make a motion to approve this change in the change order policy.
Second.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by John, seconded by Craig, for the
Which one
change
are we
order.
making a motion on? The alternative variations or the recommendations?
The recommendation.
That's a good point, yes, thanks.
Recommendation on the change order authorization. Now, discussion on the motion. Glenn, you
Okay.
had your hand up.
At the city council, we're here for oversight. We're supposed to keep an eye on taxpayer dollars and make sure they're not being wasted. So we have a responsibility, and we can't always turn that responsibility over to city staff. I was looking at possible examples, and if we had a $100,000 project, as I understand it, there's 5% contingency, that's $5,000, and then the city administrator is 25, so city staff could spend an extra $30,000 or 30% of the project cost at their discretion, and the city council would not be asked for its approval or whether or not it approves of that action. Tonight we approved a $2.7 million, the city council approved a $2.7 million project. 5% of that is $135,000. If you add $25,000 for the city administrator's discretion, that's $160,000. So after tonight, the city staff, on its own, can spend $160,000 without any city council approval on this project. And I have problems with that, and I am in favor of oversight, and what we've had in the past I think has worked. The change orders that have come before the city council, if we think they're valid, we approve them. I don't think it's that big a problem, and it's maybe a PR problem for the community and city staff. They don't like the public opinion regarding change orders, but again, I feel like we're here for oversight, to watch out for taxpayer dollars, and we're giving up part of that oversight responsibilities if this is approved.
Glenn, I respect your view, obviously. The only clarification I would add is that under this policy, the council would be informed of each and every change order, and we would be presented with all of the change orders and the final change order.
Mr. Mayor, I have a point that I'd like to make, and I don't recall in my 4+ years tenure on the council that we've ever not approved a change order, because the change orders had already taken place, which is part of the ridiculousness of bringing the change orders forward. And the other part of it is that, well, I'll leave it at that. That's the point that I have is that I understand what Councilman Baracola is saying, and I do respect that, and I do believe the check and balance. And I guess my other point is that I don't believe that there's two kinds of change orders, I think, on our projects. There's project enhancements or additions based on things that happen that aren't necessarily time sensitive, that I don't believe would be done as a change order. I believe that our staff would be conscious enough to bring those forward and have us approve those. The change orders that I think we're trying to fix are the ones that are construction stopping, where there's an unknown that's run into, and I think the petroleum contaminated soils on a utility project is a classic example. The tree, another example. Are you gonna park that crew, wait 2 or 3 weeks for council to come to a meeting, and it could take that long? Those crews are gonna leave town. Now all of a sudden the project it's missing its deadline, no fault of the contractor. Pretty soon now the contingency for failure to meet a deadline is on us and not on the contractor. And I mean, all the ways you shake this thing out, I think we need to fix a problem that we have that's not a huge problem, but it's an administrative piece, and it feels ridiculous for me to constantly be looking at a council to approve change orders after they've already taken place, and I'd hate to see the ramification, that lawsuit, when we didn't approve one.
Well, I agree with, everybody's comments. I just, being a new kid on the block, and I'm going to use this again, I too had a discussion with Jason about this, and like Dr. Meister, I voted against it the first time, and I went up and met with Jason, and I said, let's talk about this. And one of the things we talked about is that the county has a $10,000 limit. And so if their project is $100,000 or $10 million, and they make all sorts of change orders, plus and minuses, as long as it falls within that original amount, of $100,000 or $10 million plus their contingency, they don't even bring it back to the commissioners, as long as it stays within that amount. The only time they bring it back to the commissioners is when it exceeds that amount. So if you have a $100,000 project and if it goes over $105,000, then I personally have a problem with $25,000. That's a lot of money. I mean, in the city's scope of things, it isn't, but in representing our citizens of Marshall, $25,000 is a lot of money. I mean, and that's my only take on it. I don't want to slow progress either. And Jason explained this very well to me, and again, I go back to thank him for his time to do this, and I just, let the project proceed as long as it's within the total amount there, and if it exceeds that total amount, because Glenn, I think last month here, we had a change order that decreased the amount by $1,500. You know, every project is going to have some plus and minuses, I would think. So, you know, you don't have to come before the council unless you exceed that total amount. And my personal opinion, I have a problem with $25,000.
Other discussion on the motion? Not, are we ready to move to a vote? We'll move to a vote. Voting's closed. That motion does pass. This time I'll call for a 5-minute recess.
And there were 17 bullets, but they only said they found 14 casings. So when you see the other bullets, do you leave them in there?
Yeah, LEC building, yeah, and then, so yeah. You're right there. No, it's just. Well, they just had a. So Sharon corrected that, Sharon and Kyle corrected that today.
Oh, okay. All right. That was correction. All right. Yeah.
Yeah, that was.
I saw something come through.
Right. Yeah, that was the correction.
Under budget. And so, you know, sometimes talk, because you got to swallow your pride. Sometimes you got to say, no, I think.
Yeah, it was, yeah, I went to Lamar, yeah, it was really bad, like down from Lakes to it was like the first 15, 20 miles of water. Just stick to concrete with my truck. Chassis, both side of the cab receptions full of back of the trailer, couldn't even see the lights.
I would argue you did.
But I made it down there, made it back, so.
And plus, you got great hair.
That was a nasty project.
Right.
So would I rather pay the $1,000,001 having one? I would see.
Well, but that's the thing you got, that's cost, right?
You make me miss that conversation, but what if Bisbee had $1,000,000 contract? Oh, God. You know, if you out here.
What if Mortensen or somebody like that? What if they not have?
Oh, shit.
Yeah. Contractor X. Dodge put out bids to one contractor and the local.
There you go, yeah. God, that's frustrating. I'm sick of this shit.
We hired him. Then they merged with somebody else.
I'm out of places to put this shit.
And in there, sure. You should have fired him right then, because that's not what you hired. But then we got.
Going to Smith's Additions. In the Smith Additions.
It wouldn't have stopped it, it would have delayed it.
Yep. Yeah, that's Smith's Addition. That was the old flood hole.
So that's hindsight learning.
So this might have a conversation for surgery.
Yep. Yeah, on the northwest side of my garage, right up against Sorbel's property, I can't blow it any higher. You know, I'm gonna bust it down, try to blow it some other direction.
No, he's leaving. Bring it up, Steve.
Can't do anything about it other than get or leave.
reconvene the meeting. With the council's indulgence, I want to make one adjustment to the agenda and move agenda item number 20, the Marshall-Lyon County Library update, to the next agenda item. Is that okay with everyone? So, Michelle, Marshall-Lyon County Library Director, is here for a short update.
Yes, we would like the council, so thank you for fitting me in, by the way. You see the letter before you. This was passed by the library board last night, and it basically is a letter of support for the regional library systems to request from the state legislature additional money. They have not had any additional money since 2007, as it says in the letter, and they are working at a budget at 72% from 2009. And you can see in the fourth paragraph, I put in a data point about the Marshall-Lyon County Library. So even though it's in state code that the state funds these regional library systems, unfortunately, Plum Creek and one other regional is getting less money every year. And so that, of course, has to shift to us as members. And you can see we've had a sharp increase. So we think it's very important that the state actually does their duty and funds this at the level it needs to be funded. So the board requested that I come here tonight, and next week I'll go to the commissioners, and we're looking just for a resolution to support the library board in this endeavor.
Any questions?
Mayor, Mr. Council members, again, I want to thank Michelle because we asked her, because of the timing issue, we asked her to come tonight, and they want to submit letters to the editor, and we thought, well, it's beneficial that the council hears about it before they read the letters to the editor and the commissioners. So I thank you, Michelle, for coming, and I indulge the mayor and the rest of the council members for hearing us tonight.
Right, and it does, in 2 weeks, I'll be going to a library legislative day, and we'll be certainly taking this letter. We have submitted it to the Gallatin, Cottonwood, and Marshall newspapers, but we'll also be able to take this to the state capitol and share this with others. And it would be nice to say we also have the backing of the city and the county.
I'll make a motion. We support the efforts of the Marshall-Lyon County Library with a resolution.
Second.
Motion by Russ, seconded by Craig, or Steve? Seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Voting's closed. The motion does pass.
Thank you for your time.
Michelle. Move then back to agenda item number 19, the LEC building maintenance. Chief Jim Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The agenda item before you is related to the joint powers agreement between the City of Marshall and Lyon County regarding a law enforcement center. Back in 1996, the city and county began working together to build our current facility that currently houses our police department and the sheriff's department. Part of that agreement identifies how the common costs of operation, the repair, the servicing, the maintenance, the replacement of the mechanical and electrical systems is shared between both the city and the county. That agreement also highlights the role that the Joint Law Enforcement Center's management committees and their responsibility. For the past 20 years, the management committee has had little to meet about, mainly because there's been little maintenance or structural issues to really deal with the Law Enforcement Center. In January, the electronic security system began to fail. And at that time, we were also informed that the replacement of the air conditioning condenser and coil needed to be a priority come this spring. And neither item had been planned or budgeted for this year, but both are requiring immediate attention. A meeting was held with the Joint Law Enforcement Center's Management Committee on January 25th to discuss these issues, as well as how we will begin to identify and plan and prepare for future improvements that will be needed. And I figured I should just maybe remind everybody that the Law Enforcement Center doesn't close. It does not rest. You know, the mechanical systems, the air conditioning system, the heating system doesn't slow down, doesn't shut down. It does break down, but doesn't ever intentionally slow down on our part. So we know that the maintenance and mechanical issues, the roof, the parking lot are all going to be part of the discussions that our Law Enforcement Management Committee is going to be having in the future. The county Board has acted on their end to move forward with the proposals received from Brothers Fire and Security for the electronic security system for $39,054.69, and Bisbee Plumbing and Heating for the replacement of the air conditioning condenser and coil unit for $63,900. And based off the joint powers agreement with the county, the city's responsibility for the two projects is approximately $51,477.35. So my goal tonight was really twofold, was to simply inform the council a little bit about what the conversations are going to look like in the future with the Law Enforcement Center Committee, and I don't mention Councilman Lozinski and Schaefer on that. And then also to receive your approval to move forward with the project's proposals presented tonight and identify the funding source for these immediate needs. And maybe on the funding source, I might defer to City Council or to City Administrator Sharon Hansen.
Mr. Mayor and Council, the quotes in front of you were not budgeted for. We were not aware of the issues and items back in 2018 when the budget was being prepared. So our intent at this point is to utilize reserves and backfill those reserves with levy dollars in 2020. And we'll see how the 2020 budget and levy process goes. We did communicate, and I believe the county is in complete agreement, that the meeting of the LEC, joint LEC, should be more regular. There is a provision in the joint powers agreement that when there are expenditures, there should be notification by May 1st. We're just kind of getting back into this rhythm of opening communication and getting into a pattern of meeting. And as most of you know, when buildings and facilities and equipment get about 20 years old, they're due for replacement. Things do come up, and obviously this is the case here, that the two items are of our need and replacement, and therefore I know that the county would definitely like to see the council approve this to share in the costs.
I have a quick question here,
Yeah.
more for you, Sharon. And I have no problem with approving this, but you said the word of backfill and it said levy dollars next year. Is there some place in our budget this year that we could pull some of this out of, because 59 or 63,000 or 51, thank you, is just short of 1% of our levy increase. So is there a place that in your budget, is there a place we can pull some of this money out of instead of backfilling it with levy dollars?
Well, the one thing that I haven't had the opportunity to do yet is to look at 2018 and see if we did in fact spend all the levy dollars. I'm not entirely sure on that. And then, we have to kind of see how the year goes. It may be that we don't expend all the expenditures that we said we were going to expend on. At this time, especially with snow removal, I don't know if there's areas. I mean, there's an area there where it's gone up higher than we budgeted. I mean, a budget is it's a guess, and so we'll see how close we are to the guess and go from there. But
So
we don't just have 50,000 sitting in there. It's maybe the shortest answer I can give you.
The contingency would be backfill with levy dollars if necessary as you go through the budget year, as the closeout of 2018 is finalized. There may be areas that are identified.
Jim, I just have a question. And, you said and I support this. Your electronic system started to fail a month ago.
Yes.
I mean, make reference to what Sharon, maybe a communication gap. We should have been meeting more. Did you start having problems with it last August, for example? I mean, it's just
No, it started middle of January. And we're actually just about in crisis mode because it disrupts our flow, within the law enforcement center, and it almost becomes a safety issue.
And these are proximity cards, right, Jim, that you use to access areas throughout the
but
LEC?
the technology has changed. My first response to the county was, well, let's just fix what we got. Well, it's 20 years, the technology that we have is 20 years old, and they said you're just you're wasting dollars trying to upgrade a system that will still be 20 years old. So that's kind of where we're at, but we are in crisis mode. We have employees that can't get through the building, can't get to their offices. So it's just, yeah, we need to get it fixed. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like the repairs are going to come for another couple weeks, assuming that we keep moving forward with this.
You don't want to go back to the keys.
Well, the system is black and white, and all the movies are in color,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
You know, the system is partially in place to track movement throughout the law enforcement center. So if there's ever an issue in court with who has access to what room or what evidence, we can always go back and track that. And so it's important that we have the system that we do.
Are there any other questions, Glenn?
I haven't seen the agreement we have with the county on this, but this is in the nature of a capital expenditure, isn't it? I mean, we're replacing items. It's not so much repairs as capital expenditures.
I would agree, and I think that's the role that the law enforcement committee needs to take, and we've just never, you know, I can't speak for the years past, but I know they've hardly ever had to meet because there's never been some critical issues. So that's part of one of our goals, is to come up with a plan.
Because capital expenditures, I mean, these will belong to the county. The county has title to that building, right? We don't have title. We're renting space or whatever. I mean, it's a county building, right?
To a degree, I think and Mayor Burns might know more some of the history, but I think we paid essentially half of it, and we've been living there rent-free till we no longer choose to live there.
We actually paid 51.2% of the bonds, according to the documents that I saw. The city floated the bonds.
That's correct.
And then the county participated in the payment of debt. And then the agreement says that when the bonds are paid off, title goes to the county, and we have perpetual tenancy in the building for perpetuity, or for the life of the building. We have free rent, and we share at that same 50-50 formula for maintenance and operation.
I guess that's my concern. I mean, if it is their building, supposedly, and you know, I would think if they did repairs or improvements to the building itself that are capital expenditures, they would be responsible for that, and we share in repairs. But it would, to me, it would depend on what's in the agreement, and you know, hopefully you'll look into that and make sure it's clear as to who's responsible for what. And I can see it's a necessary expense, but the question is it all our expense, or half of it our expense, or should all of it be the expense of the county?
Thank you. I did have the same question as you did, and so we did find the agreement that was done back when the bonds were purchased for there. It says, upon full payment of the bonds and conveyance of the fee and title of the LEC to the county, the parties shall be responsible for the common costs of operation thereof in the same proportions as the party was responsible for the construction. And it goes to talk about the common cost of operation shall include repair, servicing, maintenance, and replacement of mechanical and electrical systems, repair and maintenance and replacement of structural elements not specifically attributable to either party, but is not limited to roof repair, replacement. So it does talk about some of the capital items.
And that's
in
good
there.
to bring up, because
Yes.
that really determines who pays what, and I'm glad you looked into that. Thank you.
And we did discuss that, and that was to great detail. And Glenn, you're right, we do have an option. We can vacate and then just give them our half of the building, and then we can figure out where to put the PD. You know, that's our other option. And I don't think that's a good option.
I was going to make a motion to approve the expenditure.
I'll second it.
Motion by Jim, seconded by Craig. Discussion on the motion.
Just one last thing, I applaud the committee for using a local contractor. Makes a big difference.
Well, and it helps when the local contractor smokes the bid.
Yeah.
Other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Voting's closed. You reopen the voting.
Who's having trouble on that end?
Not me.
It's not you this time, Schaefer?
Nope, not me.
Now I believe voting's closed. And that motion does pass. Okay, we'll move then to the next agenda item. This is agenda item number 21. Consider the approval of the labor agreements between the City of Marshall and AFSCME Council number 65. With us tonight, Sheila, are you going to start with this? Sheila Dubbs, our Human Resource Manager, as well as, I'm sure, our City Administrator, Sharon Hansen, will also weigh in. And let me first start by saying thank you to the city staff that worked on this with the employee group, because I recognize that there is a significant amount of work that goes into these discussions that end up being negotiations, that end up being recommendations, and that's the point that you're at this evening. Sheila?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We have a 3-year labor agreement before you tonight. Our current contract with AFSCME is expired. It expired on December 31st. So this would be for January 2019 until December 31st of 2021. AFSCME has tentatively agreed to this contract. They have taken a vote. And so with that, I provided a summary of the changes of the contract amendments in your background materials. I will briefly review those, and if you have questions, either Sharon or I will be happy to answer your questions on those. So as I mentioned, the duration of the agreement, the dates will change to a 3-year contract for 2019, 20, and 21. There was a technical change in language relating to the payment of union dues by union members. This language was proposed by the city as recommended by our labor attorney, and that's in the union security clause. In the overtime and compensatory time clause, that was a housekeeping item. Compensatory time records are actually maintained in the Human Resource Department, not in the Finance Department. In the standby clause, another housekeeping item, there needed to be an addition of a job title to that clause, the wastewater treatment senior maintenance operator. In the insurances section, the language stayed the same. The change to that in terms of the years was to change the years from the prior contract duration to the new contract duration, and then a new clause was added to that. As has been discussed with the council in the past, we are looking this year at different health insurance, group health insurance options for all of our employees. The AFSCME group has requested a seat at that table. So a new clause is in this contract that will sunset this year on December 31st, 2019, and 1 to 3 of their union representatives will be invited to the table on this insurance committee. The holidays section also was amended to be on 3 designated holidays. Those holidays are Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Day, and New Year's Day. Employees who are not scheduled to work on those dates but are called into work would be compensated double time overtime for actual hours worked. We did get a new clause for separation of employment. This was recently approved by the City Council for the Personnel Policy Manual for non-union employees. So this mirrors the policy language now in the AFSCME agreement that employees are being asked to provide us with a 2-week written notice prior to resignation to be resigning or retiring in good standing. If less than 2 weeks notice is provided and there is not a good reason for that, the employee would not be eligible for a payout of their leave accruals or severance benefits and are not eligible for rehire. We actually did have this happen with an AFSCME union employee, which was the reason we requested the language. For the wages, in 2019, consistent with what the council has already approved for the non-union group, that would be a 2% general wage increase. For the years 2020 and 2021, it would be a 3.25% increase. As we've done in prior agreements, we also have a memorandum of understanding with this one that states that the effective days of the proposed wage schedule changes reflects the first day of the pay period. That includes January 1st, and that's for internal administrative purposes. So that's consistent with several of our prior contracts. I can certainly answer any questions you have, and Sharon may have a couple of points as well.
Mr. Mayor and Council, I just want to add some additional thoughts on the benefits of approval of this contract. and maybe just go back to their initial proposal without getting into a lot of the details. We felt that they dropped nearly all of their initial proposals. And that meant a minimization of the cost of this contract. The other point to bring up, some of the language that's very typical in union contracts, and typically labor unions will look at comparable cities and their contracts and then negotiate or try to bargain for the similar language. Two areas that I think the city is strong in is our health insurance language, which states that the city determines contribution rates. Many other contracts have defined contribution amounts in the insurance provision of the contract. We do not. And then also the scheduling, we maintain really good language on when we will have employees scheduled to work and the right to send employees home if the work has ended. That's really critical. That's not, you look at some other union contracts, other union contracts are a little more favorable to the employees in that regard. The scheduling discussion was one more point of contention, I believe, for the employees. They did want to change the work schedule. We held firm on that, and part of that is give and take, and with any type of negotiation, you're not going to be always completely happy with the end result. But in this case, we think we have a pretty good contract. And then finally, for two other really strong points, we are likely low in 2019 when you look at cost of living adjustment. We did that to meet the 2019 budget that the council approved. So we really stuck to that amount of 2%. That meant that there was a little bit more of a weight put it on to the second and third year. By keeping the cost of living adjustment low in the first year, it does save the city some additional dollars versus spreading that out evenly over the 3 years. And then finally, we still have an open union negotiation with the LALS union, and internal consistency with the council has been really good at trying to maintain and for the most part have been successful in doing. If the ASME contract is approved tonight, communication of the provisions and especially the cost of the living adjustment, general wage increase, will be shared with LELS. And I think it'll put us in a strong position for that particular union negotiation. So just want to point out those important factors on the approval of the contract.
Okay, we'll open up for questions. Glenn?
Unless my Excel spreadsheet's wrong, I think when I did some calculations this afternoon, when I look at the salary schedule that we have here, the salary schedule has a 3.5% increase the first year instead of 2%. And then the next 2 years are based on that. So it looks like 3.5, 3.25, and 3.25. So is that a clerical mistake or what? But it should be changed because this is what we're approving.
It would be a 2%. So if I made an error there, it would be an error.
We could say 2% tonight, but the contract itself has 3.25 or 3.5 in it.
The tentative agreement is for 2% in 2019. So I would make the clerical
We need to change
changes
the
if
spreadsheet.
necessary. Yep.
Or the Appendix A. If you turn to, I think it's paragraph 12.5. I don't know if we made some changes here or not, but it refers to Article 10.1 and 10.6. Is that supposed to be 11.1 and 11.6? 11.1 and 11.6, I think, deal with compensation. And 10 deals with discipline. So paragraph 12.5, is that supposed to be 11.1 instead of 10.1 and 11.6 instead of 10.6?
Yes.
So that change will be made too then, correct?
Yes.
I was looking at, and I just want to make sure I understand the overtime compensation here. If I can find the paragraph here. The ones dealing with compensation where they talk about twice the regular overtime rate. I'm just see if I can find which one that is.
19.6.
In the vacation section?
Yeah, 19.6 has that. It talks about that they should be paid 2 times the regular rate of pay plus 8-hour regular rate holiday. So is it 3 times, or what are you talking about here as far as actual pay rate then?
The employee still always receives their holiday pay. They're working on a holiday.
A regular amount for
Yep.
holiday pay?
So previously, on all other holidays, all the employees in this group earn time and a half plus holiday pay. We are proposing for only 3 of the dates, Thanksgiving, Christmas Day, and New Year's Day, that it be 2 times plus the holiday.
So in a sense, it's triple pay? Am I reading that right?
I did not do the math that way, so I don't know if that,
But I mean, if
the
they
math
get
method works that
get
way.
paid at twice the regular rate for hours worked, plus they get regular holiday pay.
Holiday pay, you always get your holiday pay.
Right.
Because
But
they're working.
I'm wondering
on the
about the
holiday.
wording there as far as, it's kind of confusing as to exactly what dollar amount we're talking about. Are we
It's the
talking?
same thing. Double overtime is time and a half times 2, 3 times.
Yeah, well, it could come down, let's use snow plowing, for example, Glenn. They get their 8 hours of pay, but if they push snow for 14 hours, they'll get double pay for those 14 hours if we have a major snowstorm.
Right.
That's the way I understood it. So
Are you talking double pay or triple pay?
they would get double pay for, the way I understand it, correct me, Sheila, is they get double pay for 14, but they still get their 8 hours of holiday pay.
That is correct.
The 8 hours, you get 8 hours of pay for not punching the clock.
Correct.
That's for being an active in-service employee, that's your holiday benefit.
It-
If you punch the clock, you get double pay for all the clock hours, and it's only for employees that aren't regularly scheduled to work, they're in callback status.
So if they only work 5 hours, they only get double pay for 5 hours plus their 8 holiday. If they
Right.
work 14 hours push, you know it's 14 hours of double pay plus their 8 holiday.
Not triple unless they work, if they punch
work
in
8
and they
and
clock
punch in.
8 hours, then it's triple pay. But if they work 16 hours, it's way more than triple pay, but they've worked 16 hours of a holiday that they should have been at home or with their family.
And I just wanted to make sure that was the case that you were intending,
Right.
because oftentimes people talk about overtime, you get time and a half for overtime, which is 1.5 times your normal rate. And
Correct.
what we're talking here is, in a sense, could be triple time then, if.
Well, it's double time,
Just
but you
on the
get your holiday
holiday.
pay.
Yep.
Because it's a
Right.
holiday.
Right.
Yep.
I mentioned this point before, and that, you know, I would like to see us to move to where we have more steps and smaller steps. I can't recall, we handed in the information, but Fairwold, was it 13 or 17 steps that they've gone to, or
I don't recall which city
something like
either. I
that?
didn't bring that
But some have
information.
gone to 12 steps, and there's a tendency to increase the number of steps, and I'd like to see us increase the steps, but have smaller steps. Right now,
Well, before you go too far into that, I think previous discussion, Sheila, you may want to comment on that. There is support to look into that.
There is.
Right.
And
Right.
we'd like to look at that with the next compensation study that we do. Absolutely.
and it would be comparable to what the college is doing. The college steps are like 2.4% in steps, and I think in some of our steps, it's like 6.7% or
I don't want to
5.2.
speak for Sharon, but I believe staff
But
is
it's-
supportive of that, Glenn.
But it's something like that.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to see us move in the direction of more steps but smaller steps.
Yep.
Let me see if there's one more item. It talks about the clothing allowance, and it talks about eligible full-time employees listed by job classifications in Appendix A. Appendix A doesn't necessarily indicate those that get clothing, it just has the classifications, right?
Every individual under this agreement
In the agreement,
is
it's a clothing allowance.
eligible for clothing allowance.
So,
Every individual covered by this contract is eligible.
Is that kind
We
of
did
standard?
not
I mean,
change that clause.
I mean,
That
we're not,
is
we're not wearing
standard.
uniforms.
That is
Most employees
standard
don't wear
for-
uniforms, but they still get the clothing allowance.
Yeah, that's common. Yes. That's a common contract language item.
Sharon, you had some additional points?
Oh, I just wanted to, on the wage schedule, Sheila, I think maybe why, and I'm not sure exactly what Glenn was looking at, but the struck out provisions of 2016, 2017, 2018. I think the reason it looks like it's higher is because that union contract doesn't include when
Oh.
the city went back and increased the cost of living
That is
adjustment
correct.
based on the arbitration ruling. That
So
was favored against the city.
there was a second, I apologize, there was a second wage schedule that the council approved after the arbitration, which
That-
changed each of those amounts.
And that would have been nice to include
Yep.
here because it's not here.
My apologies.
Based on what I have here, it looks like a 3.75% increase.
That's my fault, I'm
Or
sorry.
a 3.25% increase.
Okay.
Thank you for catching that.
Other questions?
The one last thing, I mean, if we are giving an allowance for people to wear everyday clothes to work, maybe there should be something, kind of a special shirt with an insignia, City of Marshall or something
There
that they
is.
should wear then.
The
as long
employees
as-
are required to do that.
What's that?
The employees are required to place their name
I guess
and
I
a
was
City
thinking
of
more in
Marshall
the nature
insignia
of
on
clerical
it.
workers, what they.
Clerical workers are not included in this
Okay,
agreement.
so that wouldn't apply to,
It's only
clerical
the
workers
public
don't, but the
ways.
regular, these employees do then. The ones that are here.
No clerical work.
There are no clerical workers in this agreement.
Right, that's what I'm saying. The regular clerical are not covered by this.
Correct.
Yes. As far as this list then, so the engineer specialists, the building inspectors, all of them have special shirts that they're wearing then, or?
Yes, they do.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure on that. Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Sharon. Did you have a question, Doctor?
I just have a statement. I think that you guys have done a really good job at negotiating with a group that can be difficult to negotiate with sometimes, and I think you've made a good job and put a good forth effort, and I think this is a good deal.
Is that a motion to approve?
I would make the motion to approve this as written.
I would second that.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Craig. Now, discussion on the motion. If there's no discussion on the motion, we'll move to a vote. Voting's closed, and that motion does pass. We'll move on then to the agenda item number 23, the request for map amendment, the rezone. This is 1007 Erie Road. This is related to a previous action. Ilya?
Sharon,
Mayor,
could
Council.
you put up the 140, page 145? Yep, thank you.
So we are getting back to that RC range that we talked about earlier. So we did the first step, we approved the ordinance change. This is the second step. We are rezoning this area which will be used, which will basically become a city park for use as a RC range. And recommendation is to rezone this from industrial district to agricultural district to continue our process of allowing RC ranges.
Thank you, Ilya. Any questions the council has?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Craig. Discussion on the motion. We'll move to a vote. Voting's closed. The motion does pass. Thank you. We'll then move to the next agenda item, which would be the request for the conditional use permit. This is agenda item number 23 for the archery range in a agricultural district. And with us again is Ilya.
So it's again, now it's the third and final step movement to have the archery range where we all wanted to have it. So this is a conditional use because the ordinance approved was allowing archery range as a conditional use. So this is a conditional use for this particular archery range in this particular place. And as you can see, there are several okay. There are several conditions attached to that thing. The first three are standard conditions, and the last three are the ones which either provide for safety or for usability of that space, like parking spaces.
Thank you. Are there questions? Craig?
Yeah, Ilya, just a point here. The proposer was also included in the conversation coming up with the conditions in the permit, and I'm guessing that some of these probably came from him.
His presentation, for example, included that NFAA and that's the standard thing. That's the regulations which govern the archery ranges, and so that's, yes, it was part of this came from.
Very good. Any other questions?
The 20 parking spaces, you say gravel, and that's because it's a park.
It's because it's impractical to pave it. The number of parking spaces came from the ordinance. It's based on the ordinance requirements for the number of parking spaces.
But you're requiring one paved for accessible.
Correct. That's the building code requirement.
Yeah.
All accessible parking spaces must be paved for accessibility.
But the rest is
But
gravel.
the rest of them are gravel because otherwise it becomes cost prohibitive.
Does that go against our other,
There are no
other
requirements.
areas?
I mean, that's okay. The ordinance requires paved parking spaces, but since this is a conditional use, it's up to you. You have the right to approve it this way, and that was recommendation from the staff.
We talk about dust and stuff on private roads, and we talk about parking spaces for businesses and everything else, and yet,
But there are
and there's probably not going to be a lot of traffic, but
We have deviated from that
Correct.
requirement
is this
in
going
the
to come
past.
back
And obviously, this is not next to any houses or any residential district, so that's we don't think that.
And the access through the property to get to this in there,
Is
other
gravel.
than the parking area that we've just barely expanded out at the Merit Center, is all gravel. And I believe Independence Park, up until just recently, was all gravel.
and that's why I asked if, because it was a park.
I think the most recent deviation was for that very reason, and that was Ben Wright Fabrication, because they were accessing their paved area from gravel. So that was not required there when Ben Wright did their expansion.
Wasn't there another issue with Southwest Sanitation and the recycling center? That there was pavement and gravel and things like that? Glenn's
Yes.
shaking his head, yes.
That's correct.
And that one's still gravel too,
Yes,
correct?
it is.
Question I have on this, we have to provide the paved lot for the accessible space. Are they also providing sidewalks for the accessible? Makes no sense to have an accessible space if you can't get out of that space.
I believe there would be a sidewalk, but
Can we add that in as a condition that they
Yes, you
provide
can.
access
Yes, you can.
for? It makes zero sense to have accessible space if you can't access.
yes, you can.
Greg, you have the information on that?
Yeah, and I believe, and I can't remember for sure, but I'm thinking back to his proposal, and I believe that part of that was the L-shaped sidewalk. He
I think the
had
sidewalk was
sidewalks in the
shown
plans.
there on the
So if
proposal.
we add that condition, it should already be built in.
Right, it should not change what he was proposing.
And I would make a motion to add the condition that we have, it's ADA accessible to the target.
Approving with that added,
Approving, yes.
and then I'll second that.
Okay, motion by Jim, seconded by Craig. Discussion on that motion?
Let's just make sure that the ADA parking spot is nearest the sidewalk.
Well, yeah,
Right.
that would
I
help.
just say that because, as good Councilman
Know the
Schaefer has
players,
said,
right? Yeah.
common sense is not.
There's no such thing.
There's no such thing. It's a product of education and experience.
That's right.
Other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote.
No wonder you're a doctor. You're a good student.
Yes, something you said, actually.
Yeah,
Close the voting.
like at home.
Motion has passed.
Really,
Thank you.
Thank you, Elia.
Agenda item number 24, the strategic planning request for proposal. Sharon?
Mr. Mayor and Council, one of the needs for the city that was identified early on is a formal strategic plan. I'm not aware of the current existing strategic plan. I know that the council with past administrators have gone through goal work sessions and so forth. So it would be similar to some of that past work. However, we would want to formalize it and put it into a written document that could be referenced not only by staff when bringing forward recommendations for action, but also for the council. And it puts us on a clear path to initiatives and actions that we want to accomplish as a city. And strategic planning is a lot harder than it looks when you're a facilitator. It is hard sometimes when you're an existing person within the organization to get communication and draw things out of people, and having a trained facilitator really makes the process a lot more participative by all those that are present. So I am recommending that we go forward with an RFP to select a facilitator and bring that back to the council for approval. And it would be nice to begin that process prior to budget levy process for 2020 as well, if we could. And that's my recommendation. Move forward with the request for proposal and we'll bring it back to the council for approval.
Thank you, Sharon. Questions?
I have a question. It says the estimated $5,000 use out of reserve, so this is not built into the budget?
It was a planned use of reserves. We actually have other areas in our budget where we were going to utilize reserves, and this is one of those areas.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Sharon, on page 156, it says background marshal is a...
I know,
That was my question, We're supposed to fill in the blanks
I
there?
know, that was left to your imagination, right? That was...
That's for the strategic planner to come up with.
That's the conversation planning process, yeah.
I will fill that in with a profile of the city of Marshall and its community.
I thought it was a visioning prompt.
Any other questions? If not, is there a motion?
I so move.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Russ. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Voting's closed. Motion passes. Agenda item number 25, the wetland mitigation HRA-owned property located in the Sansagar subdivision. Dennis?
Earlier this evening, HRA called for a public hearing regarding sale of HRA-owned property. Part of this transaction, part of the lot, 0.43 acres, is a wetland. If it is a wetland, it pretty much makes that property undevelopable for the proposed purpose of expansion of the Action Track Share facility. It's a 4.9 acre parcel of property. Here's Action Track Share. I'm sorry, my copier was down today at work. Right in the middle, this is where Action Track Share envisions loading docks from the back side of an expansion. Here's our wetland. This, a formal wetland, it's called wetland mitigation. People have come out there and they have identified that's 0.43 acres of type 1 and type 2 wetland. That wetland can go away. You could fill it. There's trees. You can fill it in, but we have to create or preserve wetland in some other region. Local soil and water conservation folks, Board of Water and Soil Resources, and Corps of Engineers have looked at this and have approved the proposed process where the city would have to acquire twice of the area that's being mitigated. So we have to acquire 0.86 acres of wetland someplace else. There's a group out there that owns wetland bank credits, they're called, and we have to buy the credits at a rate of $19,000 per acre. 0.6 acres is 16,340 acres.
Dollars.
I'm sorry, not acres, pardon me, dollars. In addition, then the Board of Water and Soil Resources, there's another $2,500. Whether or not we sell to Action Track Chair or not, this property is basically undevelopable with that wetland there. So whether it's sold to Action Track Chair or the XYZ company, it's much more valuable if the wetland goes away. So we're just bringing it to your attention that we're requesting the approval of the expenditure, $19,000 to allow this property then to be sold to Action Track Chair. The sale is contingent upon this wetland going away. So we're just seeking authorization. State of Minnesota has signed off on this. Corps of Engineers has agreed this is not water of the U.S. So the Corps of Engineers does not assert jurisdiction. If they did have jurisdiction, we'd be paying about another $5,000 for acquisition. So the Corps has signed off, Soil and Water signed off. Wetland banks are available, wetland credits are available, and we just want to proceed so we'd set a closing after public hearing in early April and start construction soon.
Have we used all the credit? Because we got credits when the wetland was developed between, well, it's kind of on the west edge, right between Highway 68, you know, what was formerly Mount Williams. From the pipeline release. Are those credits all used up?
It's my understanding they
Yes.
are. I think the
Okay.
only wetland credits still existing are privately owned by Menards.
Oh, got it, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We do not have any credits to trade. We have
So
to
this would
acquire.
come off of the $19,000 would come off of the $59,000 sale price, so it would be yielding 40,000.
Yes.
Any other questions?
So whoever buys the property just takes care of filling in the wetlands?
Correct, yes. We would acquire the wetland bank credits, but we're not responsible for filling, leveling, doing anything, pardon me, with the property. That's buyer's obligation.
Any
That is
other?
that .86 that we have to
Yes.
find that someplace else close by, or?
These are in Yellow Medicine County. The wetland is in Yellow Medicine. Because of the type of wetlands, we have to replace 2 for 1.
We could have hunting rights on that part of the wetland?
Or fishing?
No, I do believe Mr. Swenson may reserve those to himself. I'll bet. Yes.
The only restriction on where the wetlands are acquired from has to be in the same watershed, the same major watershed.
And that's Minnesota River is the
Minnesota, yes.
Yep.
split, okay.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, any other questions?
I move the recommendation.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Steve. Discussion?
Oh, no, it's just for informational purposes only.
Just an information item, or is that action required?
Oh,
It'll probably be better to have.
I think it's action.
Yeah, originally it was just informational only, but I like the rest.
I think we should authorize it with,
Yeah, I think it should be action.
Expenditure.
you want that as a voice vote then?
No, I can, I just move first, who motion?
Motion was by Craig, seconded by Steve. Okay, then we're open for voting,
Yes.
so we'll move to a vote. Voting's closed. That motion does pass. Thank you, Dennis. We'll move then to agenda item number 26, consider the application for exempt permit for an event at SMSU for Ducks Unlimited, February 28, 2019. Is there any questions about this?
Move approval.
Motion by John, seconded by Craig. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Close voting. Motion passed. We'll note there's an abstention. We'll move then to the next agenda item, which is agenda item number 27. Application for exempt permit for SMSU Foundation for March 3rd, 2019.
Move approval.
Second?
Motion by Craig, seconded by Russ. Discussion? We'll move to a vote. Close the voting. Motion does pass. Okay, so then we'll move then to Commission Board liaison reports. Actually, the Regional Development Commission does meet this Thursday, weather dependent. Greg?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Airport Commission met last week. I got there right as the meeting ended to pick up my packet, so, but I was able to meet all the members, and I'm sure that action items will be talked about by Mr. Olson. That's all
I think we should note that one of the members, Jack Alberts, passed away. So.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
Steve?
I have nothing, Mr. Mayor.
Glenn?
I have nothing to report.
John?
Mine did not meet.
Russ?
Library Board met last night, as you know, that Michelle was here. Couple of things. They're starting a kind of a small little newsletter. They're going to just, it's kind of a neat thing that they're going to start. They're not exactly sure how many they're going to print or where they're going to distribute it, but I grabbed 3 copies, and it's kind of a newsletter of what's happening at the library in the next couple of months. So it's kind of a neat deal. We drafted the letter, and that's about it for that. Cancellations and postponements have really taken a toll at the library because they've scheduled that Creed thing a couple of different times, so now they've postponed the second one. So they're very optimistic, and Michelle said last night that one of the hardest things she has to do is close the library. You know, it's unfortunate that she has to do that. But, Police Advisory Board met very briefly. Again, that was on a storm day, and we just Public Safety Director Jim Marshall brought us up to speed of what the status of the officers are. He's going to be down 3 officers because one resigned, and I think we knew that, and going up to back to the metro area. So he asked to put that proper protocols in motion to replace those people. And again, with the additional officer up at Avera, that's going to do that too. CVB. Has not, we're going to meet later this month, but that's been the hot topic of conversation around town, so it's, there's still nothing will meet yet. That's it.
Jim?
Mine did not meet.
We'll move then to council member individual items. Jim, let's start with you.
I just have a couple of things. Bringing up CVB, I'm not going to get into that. That's another discussion. But I want to remind the public that Lauren Deitz was not there. She was hired in August. She's been getting a lot of grief for this. She's doing a wonderful job for the city. And, she's not part of what's going on. This, for the public, if you hear people talking about it, remind them that Lauren Deitz started in August and she's going to do a wonderful job for us. The other thing we bring up the CVB board, I think it'd be good to maybe with these boards that do oversee finances to give them some kind of training, board ethics training. It's not a bad thing. It's just to kind of show signs of if something funny is going on. I know when I sat on planning and zoning, we didn't have any training. We got thrown onto these boards and go at it. Now, planning and zoning doesn't oversee a budget of, a couple $100,000, but we do have boards, EDA, CVB, that, and I think the library board, that oversee budgets. So I think that's something the city should look into is ethic training. It protects the board, it protects the people in charge, it protects everybody. It's another safety valve in the whole system. And I would like to see the city implement some of that. And last but not least, I see Dean sitting out there. I commend your crews pushing snow. We've been doing it nonstop for the last 2 months. Snow is getting piled up there. I do know that I want to ask citizens, be careful going through intersections. There's intersections you simply cannot see. And again, I want to commend your crew because it has been a miserable 2 months. So, that's all I have.
Okay. Russ?
Speaking of that lovely 4-letter word, snow, I've had a couple of calls from the residents that live on the south end of Patricia Court. There are numerous apartments over there, and both of them have told me they used to call Larry Doom when he was on the council, and I'm sure they called David Sturrock when he was on the council. But what's happening is that the people in the apartments are piling their snow across the street, and they're tired of it. The one on the corner there, he does a yeoman's job of opening up that sidewalk, but he opens it up and the people just fill it all back up from the apartments. And the piles at the apartments are pretty high. So they're going to have to start probably paying to haul it away because the residents down there are not happy. And in addition to the snow, you've got all those apartment buildings, so you got additional parking on the streets. So the plows, it's probably a nightmare for the plows going around in Patricia Court. It really is. So Glenn, I would ask that maybe the staff look into that, and I will tell the residents that have called me that to call you and complain and start that process, because, that's all we can do. The other thing is Councilman Lozinski and then Councilman Meister, I think a couple of years ago, attended the League of Minnesota Cities training for new elected officials. I had that opportunity at the end of January, and it's very worthwhile. I think that if they offered a refresher course for all of us, I think all of us should take it, but it was very worthwhile to attend, and you gain a lot of information in a short period of time. You really do. That's all.
I just going to echo to anybody listening out there the same thing that Jim said. Watch those intersections. They're piled up high, especially white cars. I just about got into one today already, so it's something to really watch for. And good job to you guys and the snow crew. It's a lot of work to see them going to it. So,
thank you, John. Craig?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and might as well get on board. Yeah, absolutely, great job on the snow removal, and again on the hard to see, especially on the primary routes, the College Drive, Main Street, Saratoga, Marshall Street, some of the major connectors, Bruce. People that are on the main routes, even though you have the right-of-way, slow down, because if you ever want to know what it feels like to be a gopher trying to cross a highway, try to cross College Drive or Main Street, when you're pulling out and trying to go across, and you can't see, and out to the crews like you guys don't have enough to do. If there's any way, when you have the time, when the snow stops, I know you're going to dig those corners out. And then again, I think it was Councilmember Labatt that talked last time about fire hydrants. As bad as they were before, if you have one on your lot, for the people out there that are listening, if you can, try to dig them out, or at least maybe even put something up, because I'm guessing not all of them have flags. It's going to be hard to find them. So I think you're going to want to, if you can, dig those out too. But again, hats off to the city crew. An awesome job. It's been a tough month and a half.
So on the same line as Councilmember Labatt, I've had people complaining on Robert Street. There's a apartment building right there on Robert and Saratoga, and the plows did a great job, given that all the cars were there and they had to go around. So there was actually a public road with a one lane through it. It's really tough. So I don't know, we talked about even odd parking at some point in time during snow emergencies, and that's a perfect example of why it should be done. Because that would have allowed the plows to plow one side, and then the next day they could have done the other side. And in this cycle, it seems like every other day we're getting another measurable snow that needs to be moved, so.
It's down to every day now.
Yeah. So that's one thing, and then same thing with the intersections. It's especially like on College Drive. We got plowed 2 years ago on Jewett because you couldn't see the cars, and we just went out, and the first car you could see, and in the middle lane there was a car going about 50 miles an hour and didn't see it coming because of snowbank. So if at some point in time, I don't know what point in time the city decides to shave those things down, but I can imagine an ambulance going down Saratoga and getting plowed, and that would not be good. So,
Mr. May, on a kind of on a side note on that, if the residents of Marshall are curious about how much snow is getting moved, Dean, I don't know how many places you're dumping, but I know like west of the old Bud Rose Flowers towards the airport, go take a look at those sites where the snow's getting hauled to, and I can envision here pretty quick, D&G or somebody's going to go out there with a dozer to help you push it a little higher, because those things are filling up pretty good. And the bad news is, I hate to be Mr. Calendar, but we're not even to the middle of February yet. Remember last April?
Yep.
Hi, Mr.
Sure do.
Calendar.
Okay. Glenn?
I wasn't going to say anything, but in the last couple of days, driving around town, and I noticed a couple of instances where people are stuck in their driveway because snow gets piled up when the crews go around and it goes in their driveway, and two parties got stuck. And what's nice is they're stuck in their driveway, and all of a sudden you get all these strangers coming and helping them, get out, pushing their cars or whatever, or shoveling or whatever. But it speaks highly of our community where you're willing to go out and help a stranger when they're stuck in the snow. I was impressed by that. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. I'll just have several things. I mean, I think I feel left out if I didn't say something about the about the excellent snow removal. I think we should add, you know, we've been through a tough stretch, but it's going to get better. It always warms up, and it will. So, and I'm sure by the time we get to St. Patrick's Day,
August,
we'll have a good parade. So, I would say on the serious note, we did have. Russ mentioned League of Minnesota Cities, so League of Minnesota Cities Legislative Day is coming up in about a week. I plan to attend, but if anybody else plans to attend, certainly welcome. Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities Legislative Day was now almost 2 weeks ago, and that was lightly attended, really because that was at horrible weather conditions. So I was up there, though, for a hearing because that morning the Senate Capital Investment Committee held a hearing on the Public Finance Authority. So I did testify and on behalf of the PSIG funding. Of course, that's very important for Marshall for our water treatment plant. And just so happened I happened to be there, and the hearing was at 8 o'clock in the morning, and that was one of those days that people likely couldn't get in. So now a similar hearing is being held tomorrow morning, also I believe early, 8:30, on the House side, and Brad Rose will be up and will testify for that event. With that, I think I'll pause in the interest of time and turn to the next agenda item, which is staff reports, starting with Sharon.
Mr. Mayor and Council, I did receive the city levies across the state of Minnesota. The average city levy increase for 2019 was 6.2%, and I will forward on the Excel spreadsheet so you can look at all the communities in the state. That's all I had, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Sharon. Glenn?
I'll try to be brief too. But Dean Kudrin is here tonight. I'd like Dean to come up and talk a little bit about snow removal, and specifically we have some older equipment. The new equipment is old, and we've had some issues with that. If you could come up, Dean, and just explain the snow blower that we use for loading trucks broke down last week. We have the old one in operation, but maybe talk about that a little bit, what year it is. And
well, thanks, Mayor, Council. First thing is our new blower, which is a 96, and I'm guessing it's got probably close to 8,000 hours on it. And the last year we put just about $14,000 into it, and right now it's down, and we're guessing another $5,000. So it's in the CIP to get changed. I think it's next year, or 2021, excuse me. The motor grader I know is coming. I'm going to bring that forward. I talked to Craig a little bit. We'll meet on that. But right now, the leased motor grader, we got 178 hours on it already. And I think they're charging, don't quote me, it's $65 an hour, which is real reasonable. Right. So my plan is with that motor grader is to get a new one and get rid of our old, I think it's 30-some years old with 14,000 hours on it. Right now with that motor grader, the heater system in it, every once in a while we got to bring it into the shop. You can't even see out the windows because they're so fogged up on the inside. It doesn't have AC, where if you had AC it would draw moisture out. This particular one don't. So it's got some major issues too, but I'm not going to put a ton of money into it until I know what's going to happen with that unit. We got a couple trucks that are always down. They're probably, I think the one in particular is a 2000 model. But these trucks in the conditions they're used are very, very, I don't want to say worn out, but they're to the point. Rust on them is just creating all kinds of hazards with that thing. Can't keep wiring together, the brake lines, air lines, whatever it is. And this particular one is air. I mean, we just can't keep them up to date. They're constantly costing us money. So, but other than that, and I know I appreciate all the comments on the snow removal. it's been a bear. It's continuous. And right now, I really understand the concern with the intersections, which is huge. I'd like to get to them before I could do the cul-de-sacs, but our cul-de-sacs are full. So hopefully, if the snow lets up in a couple days, we can get them hauled out. And actually, normally we'll do all that ourselves, but the last few times I've been hiring trucks, because our trucks are small, we can haul twice as much with D&G coming in, so try to speed up the process. Other than that, yeah, it's just the equipment, you know, it's a battle, so.
Maybe something I could add is that periodically in the winter times when we have significant amount of snow like we do have now, we will declare a snow emergency to clean the streets. And exactly what one of the council members indicated earlier, I think it might be that time that when we declare the snow emergency, we do odd even. Because there is no place to park for a lot of people who don't have off-street parking. I mean, if you want to park your vehicle, you probably have to haul it out to Walmart's parking lot and have somebody haul you back when we're going to remove it. Because you can't just park around the corner until we come by. So that's something you might hear happen in the near future. If we get another 4 inches on Thursday and the streets are starting to get narrower, we may have to declare that snow emergency, and then we'll probably put some caveats on that emergency. Right now, it just goes citywide, and everybody's got to be off the street, period. But we'll be working on maybe a little tweaking to that. We can't do the whole city when we're doing curb to curb anyway, with this amount of snow. And we see a lot of vehicles that are covered with snow from the last snowfall. And they need to get out of there, they need to be towed away. We're trying to do some PR work through the Independent and through our website that asks people to move. They know when we're coming. After it snowed, they know when we're going to be there within 2-3 hours. So we're asking them to move and also help participate with their neighbors. That was mentioned before. That really helps a lot. If you have the equipment and the manpower to do it and you know somebody is having a little struggle next door, help them out a little bit, for heaven's sakes.
One question I have is, and, you know, we may not, it probably isn't for deep discussion tonight because it's probably in the CIP, but the equipment at the airport, specifically the blower at the airport, at what point does that get on the replacement schedule at the airport so it could be repurposed for city use?
It's actually, that big blower we have is, I think it's in here in a couple of years. That blower is just about $1 million right now, a new one.
But tell them how it operates.
But in this one here, though, it works great if you're on flat surface.
Yeah.
But if you got any, because it only raises about this high, that blower unit. And we had it out here last Tuesday. You know, so it was well used. We were out in Carr Estates, or we were at several, out by the high school, we're several places. But you got to be careful because you can only blow 2 directions, and that's both sides.
Right.
You know, unless we went through, we do have a chute for it, but it's kind of a nuisance too. So if we had to, we could do it. But I think we got that in the CIP for probably a couple of years.
And that was used when it came, I believe it came from the Metropolitan Airport.
Yes, it did. That did, yep, come from the MAC. So, yeah, that's one of the downfalls with that. It's just so ungodly expensive.
On the snow emergency, which I can understand we do that, but, and I know working with the paper is great. Maybe 1/4 of the city gets the paper.
Right.
So I do know, like, we've been in Minneapolis when this goes leaf removal. They put signs up along the street the night before saying they're coming by. And, you know, the paper's a great idea if you get it, but like I said, 25% of the people in town get it.
We do social media too, and we do our website, but I know everybody.
But just a stick and a sign, you know, on each corner, so we're gonna do, you know, then you have, you know, there's no reason they don't move their car.
We should
It
be
takes out
able,
another excuse.
shouldn't we be able to do VAST and charter with PSAs? Can we do community notice on there? I think we can.
Yeah, another major issue, and you guys probably see it too, is trash cans.
Right.
You just will park cars there because you got
Those things roll
cans.
up the bank so good though.
I know, but you know how many calls you get if you hit one?
I just dumped your garbage for you.
Yeah, you know, it's a battle, it really is, so.
We could do
but
garbage
this
and
year's
soccer with a snowplow.
MMU also
It's
has a crew that goes out and does fire hydrants.
Yes.
MAU's been
But do
out.
your own if you can.
Yep.
But they come out.
Yep.
And if somebody has a difficult time and they know one that's buried, give us a call, because we don't know where they are all. MMU's got a GPS map of everyone in town, I believe.
And they do have them flagged.
Yeah.
With the metal flags.
Some of them do.
Yeah.
Some of them are
Bent over.
deformed, yeah.
Kids
Right.
are
Well,
good
and
at
the other
bending
issue you
them over.
run into is if you start going curb to curb, that's put a lot of snow in driveways. That's why it's nice.
It is, and I get
It
tons
is
of
what it is. We
complaints
got it.
that-
I mean,
You know, I'm sure you guys hear it too. As soon as you get their driveway clear, here comes the plow. And I had a gal
There's
call
stuff
me
on the
yesterday, I said,
Facebook
the
about
best thing
that.
to do is wait until we're by if you can, otherwise you're gonna be doing it twice. So,
Well, sometimes.
Your blower that you've got $5,000 worth of repair, how long before it's back up and running?
I'm hoping probably by the end of the week, if we can get a cover, one of the main covers, a bearing let go and it wore out the cover. So, and that's a process. That gearbox, you gotta take the whole unit completely apart because it's down underneath, it drives the impeller. So, it's expensive, but a
What
new
kind of
blower is probably 180. So,
Thank you, Dean.
just an
for your
update.
work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Glenn, anything else?
The Helena Chemical update at the airport, we're still letting that process take its course, but there has been some movement from Helena in Canby about discussing it anyway, so nothing really new. The annual $150,000 federal allocation carries over to next year, so that's some of the money that we would use for acquisition. So that's all for the airport update. That's all I have.
Dennis?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. A couple of meetings ago, you approved the move-in of a home from the Milroy area out to the Parkway 2 addition. That transaction closed. Those folks bought that bare lot. They closed on that last week, so that when weather permitting, that they own the lots, they'll be moving the property. We'll have to dig a hole first.
Very good.
or parking on the street.
I don't think so.
Good deal.
Anything else, Dennis?
Hey, Rob.
We'll move then to the next agenda item, which is the, you have the administrative report for your information. Any comments you want to make on that? The upcoming meetings are listed, which brings us to agenda item number 36 to consider adjourning. Motion by Craig.
Second.
Seconded by Jim to adjourn. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Close voting. That motion passed. We're adjourned.